Well, good morning, everybody. It is very good to see you. Thank you very much for turning up and for being here, for your presence. And we're going to begin with prayers, which will be led by our brand new, well, fairly new now, Bishop of Penrith, Rob Sainer-Haig. Rob is there. I see him at the back. I'm going to ask Rob to come up to the front, if you'd be so kind, Rob. And most of us here will know Rob very well from his time in the diocese. He's a child of Carlisle Diocese, if I can put it like that. He was a curate in Appleby and has been successively Bishop's chaplain and director of ordinands, and was then for about 10 years, I think, was it 10, vicar of Holy Trinity in Kendal. And during that time has got to know a very large number of people. A few here went through his hands, as it were, when they were going for ordination, and some have been his parishioners in parishes. He went off to Newcastle Diocese. Somebody needs to go there. We're glad to send missionaries to the more benighted parts of the country. And he was there for a couple of years. I refer to it as his sort of finishing school, where he was finally prepared for the awesome responsibilities of Bishop of Penrith, which he's now taken on, and I'm delighted that he's going to be leading prayers for us this morning. Rob, over to you.
Well, good morning, everybody. It's really lovely to be here. I have to say, I am delighted to be back. I'm not sure we can describe the lovely Diocese of Newcastle as the benighted Diocese of Newcastle. So, Laura, when you go back, tell them I've defended them. And it was slightly strange to be a diocese that referred to us as the Southern Diocese of Carlisle. Anyway, it is just a joy to be back home in this diocese, and I can't tell you how lovely it's been for the last few weeks since I started going about and seeing people and seeing lots of people again and meeting new people who've arrived. And I was driving the other day, and I said this moment, I said, I'm driving to Egremont, isn't that great? So that tells you something about how much I'm enjoying it. Before I go, I just need to check. I'm doing a biblical reflection as well. Is that correct? Yeah. Good. Okay. Not just prayers. Good. Okay. That's all right. I want to start with a reading from the letter of James, chapter 2, verses 14 onwards. And what good is it, my brothers and sisters, if someone claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can such faith save them? Suppose a brother or sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to them, go in peace, keep warm and well fed, but does nothing about their physical needs, what good is it? In the same way, faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead. But someone will say, you have faith, I have deeds. Show me your faith without deeds, and I will show you my faith by my deeds. You believe that there is one God. Good. Even the demons believe that and shudder. You foolish person. Do you want evidence that faith without deeds is useless? Was not our father Abraham considered righteous for what he did when he offered his son Isaac on the altar? You see that his faith and his actions were working together, and his faith was made complete by what he did. And the scripture was fulfilled that says, Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness, and he was called God's friend. You see that a person is considered righteous by what they do, and not by faith alone. In the same way, was not even Rahab the prostitute considered righteous for what she did when she gave lodging to the spies and sent them off in a different direction? As the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without deeds is dead. In 1977, when Elvis died, there were 9 known Elvis impersonators in the world. By the year 2000, there were at least 485,000 Elvis impersonators. So apparently if this trend continues, by the end of this century, 1 in 5 people in the world will be an Elvis impersonator, and they will represent the largest people group on earth. You can sit with that statistic for a moment. Of course, this passage from James is about being a Jesus impersonator, about holding together faith and works. We're called to live as disciples, as imitators of Christ, to be little Christ, to be both active in this and self-conscious about it. In this passage, it's clear that the problem that James is addressing in the church is the people's lack of works. They've got faith, but they aren't following it up with action. They aren't becoming little Christs, just little believers in Christ. That's easy to do, perhaps. After all, whilst I do believe in Elvis, I don't try to be like him. Even wearing a purple shirt. Works prove the worth and reality of faith. They show that the faith professed in words is grounded in the way it has changed the person. It means that faith in a God who invites all to his feast and welcomes all who accept to his table, who hates sin for what it does to people and communities, and who longs to transform brokenness wherever he finds it, should also mean that those of us who profess to follow should allow that faith to affect the decisions that we make at home, at work, in life. It affects how we speak of one another. It affects the causes we support or the decisions we make at work. It applies to our tax return as much as it applies to our visits to sick neighbours. It applies to our honouring God rather than ourselves and our behaviour in church, at home, and when no one is looking. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbour as yourself. See how easily it trips off my tongue, off our tongues. But it's not quite so easy to do. And if James is writing to a church which needs to be reminded that faith is dead without works, what would he say to the church today? For all that it is true that salvation is a work of utter grace, that we cannot earn it, I have a suspicion that he might be writing to the church of today that works without faith are dead. For so often the church today is defined by niceness. It's domesticated about respectability and good works. But where is the faith which calls us into choppy seas and the uncertainty of the Spirit? John says, the Spirit blows wherever it chooses. You don't know where it's been or where it is going. And so it is with everyone who's born of the Spirit. For God is not domesticated, and neither is faith. That now very old film, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, which as an archaeologist I had to live with, everyone thinking was that actually that's what I did as for a living. When Indiana's about to step out to the last bit across the chasm, and he sees in front of him that there's nothing, but yet the book he has says, it's all right, step out, you'll be fine. And he has to take this moment where he steps out and work out whether actually there's something there to save him. And he steps out with faith, and finds that there is indeed a bridge that he can't see, but which still holds him up. Faith asks great and brave things of us. Faith takes guts because it calls us out of our safety zone. But faith in action finds that God is real. We can deny the role of God in our lives through an absence of faith. We can do lots of good works, we can help others, we can care for others, we can organise rotas, give generously to charity, etc., etc. But we can completely miss the call of faith. Never give God room to be the reality in our lives. We don't get to the side with all that is waiting for us there and all the healing that we find there because we won't step out into the air and trust that God will hold us. So the Christian life calls us to hold in tension these two concepts, faith and works. On the one hand, faith is what defines us. We're called Christians because we believe in Jesus Christ, the Father who sent him, and the Holy Spirit who lives within us. Faith often calls us into difficult situations. It requires us to take risks, to believe in something so that it changes how we do things. Church without faith is too respectable and safe, and in the end it dies out. Some at the moment see us like those who are kind of stuck on a steadily retreating glacier panicking about how to stop the thing that we are standing on shrinking. Or we are like the boy who stands on the burning deck, whence all but he have fled. But no, because this is God's work. And maybe, as we stand on this ice sheet, worrying about it retreating, maybe actually what he's doing is calling us to jump into the water and to not to save ourselves, but rather to actually discover that we were made to swim. That is our environment, to be free to jump into the water, because that's what we were made for. Faith is not just about belief. It needs action to give it substance and to prove its value. There are times in our own church life where we are so busy with organisation and maintaining the status quo, or worrying about how people will react to things, that we forget that we are Christians and that what we are about, the work we are about, is the work of Jesus Christ himself. And that can be uncomfortable. Jesus was about saving, rescuing, healing a broken world and broken people for the glory of the Father. There isn't much in the Gospels about commissions and strategies, perhaps, but there is an awful lot about healing, about repentance, about prayer, about new starts, about holiness and shared lunches. Our challenge then is to have both faith and works. First, we have to have faith that God is real and that Jesus has reconciled us and the world to him, and that all of us are invited and welcome to his table. And he often calls us to do difficult things and perhaps be less than respectable. And in response to that great welcome from God, we are called to respond in how we live, in the way that we talk, the way that we work, the things that we choose to buy, the causes we support, the way that we treat one another, the things that we give our time to. We're called to respond with action so that we have integrity. Our actions and our words match. And over time, called not to be Elvis impersonators, but Jesus impersonators. More and more the image bearers that we were created to be. And then to invite others through all that journey to share that journey with us and the healing and hope that we only find in Jesus Christ. Amen. Let us pray. Loving God, we give you thanks for this day, and we pray for one another. We pray that you would guide our deliberations and our conversations today. All of them, all those that are in groups, but also the conversations to the side at lunch. Bring us together, Lord. May we show you in the way that we speak to one another. May we show you in the decisions that we make, in the commitments that we make, in the life that we share. We pray today, once again, that you would help us to follow your Son, to know him, to love him, to share our life with him. We pray that you would help us to care deeply for one another, to care deeply for our neighbours, to seek your kingdom wherever it is that we go. And in this hurting world, in our communities which are struggling and anxious, that we would not only care deeply to bring something of your peace and your wholeness and your amazing grace, but also to speak boldly, to share your good news in our words, to challenge injustice, to seek your kingdom with courage and faith. And let us also tread gently, not just in the way that we care for the environment, the way we seek to care for the world that you have made and which reflects your glory, but also in the way that we deal with one another, Let us tread with care and purpose. And Lord, as we commit ourselves to you today, once again, and our fellowship and our partnership in your work, and ask for your guidance and wisdom as we work together and deliberate together, we also pray for your world. In a moment of quiet, let us bring to God those situations and people who are today particularly on our hearts. Lord, we seek your peace. We long for your kingdom to come. And may you do for each of those we have prayed for, according to their need today. Almighty God, you have made us for yourself, and our hearts are restless until they find their rest in you. Pour your love into our hearts and draw us to yourself, and so bring us at last to your heavenly city, where we shall see you face to face, through Jesus Christ our Lord, who is alive and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen. And so let us pray as our Saviour has taught us. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread, and forgive us our sins, as we forgive those who sin against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For the kingdom, the power, and the glory are yours, now and forever. Amen. The Lord bless us and preserve us from all evil, and keep us in eternal life. Amen. Let us bless the Lord. Thanks be to God.
Thank you very much, Bishop Rob. Now, in a moment or two, Shanti, I hope, will take over as chair of this meeting. But before she can do that, she has to be co-opted as a member of this synod. And we have one other person to co-opt also, and that is Canon Benjamin Carter, who is the Canon Warden at the Cathedral. Now, this is an election by members of the House of Clergy. So I'll take each of these in turn. Those who are members of the House of Clergy, are you happy that we should co-opt Benjamin Carter to this synod? Please raise a hand. Thank you very much. Is anybody unhappy about Benjamin's election? That's great. Benjamin is elected. And Shanti, are you happy that we should re-elect Shanti as a member of this synod? Please, members of the House of Clergy, if you'd like to raise a hand. Those in favour? Thank you very much. Those against? Anybody abstaining? Shanti is duly elected, so I will hand over to her as chair of the meeting.
Thank you very much. Good morning. It's good to be here, and we all missed out on welcoming Bishop Rob to the diocese at a lovely service at the cathedral. So we're going to do that just now on behalf of the houses of laity and clergy. So sorry, Rob, you've got very long legs. Could you come back to the front again? And Chris, can I invite you to welcome Rob on behalf of the laity?
Yeah, on behalf of the House of Laity, it gives me really great pleasure to welcome Rob, first of all, back to Cumbria, but also into his new post. I think it's an appointment which has been received with real delight across Cumbria.
Thank you.
And later today, we're going to be talking further, I think you and Bishop James, about our vision and strategy.
Yes.
And one of the key things that will help make that a success is the involvement of the laity.
Absolutely.
And I think we really look forward to working with you to try and make it an outstanding success.
Great.
So thank you.
Thanks so much, Chris. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. And I'm going to stay sat down because the contrast is just too much. To pick up on your theme, as at the beginning of Indiana Jones, The Temple of Doom, as my great auntie, who was a very famous actress in her own right, greeted Indiana Jones as he entered her village, I want to greet you as you come not into the Temple of Doom, but into the Diocese of Carlisle. And I hope that together we can work with you to do whatever they did in that film, because it's the worst of all of the films, but to grow disciples of Jesus, to help people not just to become imitators, but really to live that Christian faith and to work it out so that everyone knows God is for them. So welcome on behalf of the clergy.
I was just about to make some comments about the fact that obviously Holy Trinity wanted a complete contrast there to one of their previous speakers.
Yes, I've spent the last 12 months saying, you're used to a tall man, you've got a short woman now.
Well, as I said before, it's just a joy to be back, and thank you. And I'm so looking forward to working with all of you, and as we encourage one another as the body of Christ to do the things that we have been called to do. So, and I do that with great hopefulness and faith and excitement. So I look forward to it's a long years working together. We're going to go sit down again.
You can go and sit down now. We are sponsoring you for the amount of times you go up and down this hall today.
It's a public right of way. I'm just keeping it.
We move on to item 3 on the agenda. You'll have paper A, I hope, the minutes of the previous meeting. Were there any factual inaccuracies in those minutes that anybody would like to highlight? Are you happy then that I sign those as a correct record of that meeting? Anybody objecting to that? No. Lovely. And are there any matters arising from those minutes that aren't already on the agenda? Marvellous. We'll definitely be home by 4. Right, we're going to move on now to the Bishop's Council report, which is paper B. Can I ask the meeting to receive that paper? And if there's any questions arising from that. Thank you very much. Right, we're now going to move on to the election of the Board of Education, and I'm going to invite Charlotte Tudway to come and introduce this item.
Thank you. As Synod will recall, the new Diocesan Boards of Education measure, which came into effect in April 2021, required each diocese to make a scheme setting out the governance arrangements for the Board of Education. Synod will also recall that the various options available in the measure, we chose to become a statutory subcommittee of the Diocesan Board of Education. We chose this option for 2 reasons. One, it most closely reflects our current working relationships with the Board of Finance. And it also enables us to continue to draw on the expertise of our colleagues within the Board of Finance staff team. The scheme, which was approved by Synod at its meeting in March of this year, has now been certified by the Archbishop's Council and will come into effect on the 1st of January 2023. The terms of reference, which you'll have had sight of, set out the functions and the procedure for the Board of Education. Quite a lot of their content is prescribed by either the measure or the scheme. I've already taken some questions by email. Thank you to those of you who've been in touch. And I just wanted to check whether anybody had any questions or comments about those terms of reference which you will have received. Excellent.
So we need to ask you to signal your approval to those terms of reference which will be formally approved by the DBF. Are you happy to accept those terms of reference? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now we're going to come on to the next part, which is the election of the Board of Education. Now, the Diocesan Board of Education, are you going to do this, Derek? Lovely, thank you very much. That's even better.
As Charlotte described, the Board of Education has been through a process of sort of being reconstituted with the new scheme. What this meant was that because the last time we had elections to diocesan boards and committees, the Board of Education was in the process of being reconstituted, we didn't have elections to the Board of Education. We can now, because we've got the scheme in place, appoint new members to the Board of Education to replace the people whose term was extended for a year previously. You will know, because you will have received the nomination papers, etc., I was going to say in the post. I don't know if they were in the post or emailed actually. But you've had the nomination papers. The election is imminent. The deadline for nominations is next Thursday, 20th of October. There are places for both clergy and laity on the board. It's really important, given not only the place of church schools within the diocese, but also the growing younger element of what we're trying to do as a diocese, that we have a really good, active, competent Board of Education supporting Charlotte under Andrew's chairmanship, wherever he is. So I'd really encourage you to think about nominating some good people. It's always better when you have an election to have an election rather than people just being appointed because other people haven't stood. So I'd encourage you to think of people to stand, get them nominated, and if you're thinking, oh crikey, what did I do with those papers or that email, there are more nomination papers on the table outside the door. So there's no escape from thinking about that over lunchtime maybe. Charlotte will answer any questions about what the DBE does if anyone has any and wants to know in more detail why this is so important. Otherwise, you have been given notice of the nomination process. Okay.
Thank you. Item 7, I'm going to hand over to Ali Ying now for the Deanery Synod election formula. You've got paper C, I hope, in front of you.
Good morning, everybody. As the paper states, the triennial Deanery Synod elections are due to take place next year. And as we are carrying 175 vacancies, we have looked at reviewing the formula. So the proposal that you've got in front of you is a change both in terms of electoral roll figures, so where it was 1 to 25, 26 to 100, and 101 to 200, it's now proposed to be 1 to 50, 51 to 125, and 126 to 200. And then in addition, for those parishes with 5 or more parish churches, where previously for those parishes with more than 101 on the electoral roll, it was an additional 2 members per parish. It is now proposed to be for parishes with more than 126 on the electoral roll, an increment as detailed in the 5 or over column on your paper. I've sought the opinions of the Rural Deans and the Deanery lay chairs, and all that responded except one were in favour of a reduction. The one against stated we should encourage more people to stand rather than reduce the number of places. And I've also spoken to the team rector of the Binsey group of parishes who have the most number of reps elected under the 2+ system, and again he's supportive of the proposals. Does anybody have any questions?
Right, are we all in favour of approving this new formula? Anybody against? And anybody abstaining? Thank you very much. I just encourage you to encourage your fellow parishioners, fellow clergy to make sure that they take up those positions on Deanery Synod. It would be great if our Deanery Synods were full. We're going to move on now to the General Synod report, which I'm going to invite Chris to take the lead on with Val.
Right, good morning once again. You will have had a two-sided report on General Synod on your chairs, so we'd encourage you to read that. And as always, if you actually want to know more detail about what went on, all the papers and transcripts of the sessions and so forth are all available on the Church of England website. And indeed, I think so are recordings of all the sessions. We've got a good sprinkling of all our Synod reps here today, apart from one. Zoe sends her apologies, and if we bring up the next slide, we might see why. Because she's only very recently given birth to Dassie, who you can see up there. So Zoe is not joining us in person today. And I'm going to ask now Valerie Hallard to come and talk a bit, particularly about what went on the fringes of Synod. Unfortunately, I went down with COVID just before the start of Synod, so I had to attend it remotely. And I greatly miss not actually being in York for it. So I could see all the sessions, but I missed out on what else was going on. So I'll hand over to Val.
Thank you. The fringe meetings at General Synod are organised by a member of General Synod or a group on General Synod to enable people who want to know more about a particular topic to learn more. And they're very useful, but they're very difficult to choose between because there's so many of them. And you have to choose where you're going to have your breakfast, where you're going to have your lunch, where you're going to have your evening meeting in order to squeeze them all, as many in as you can. I was a bit more careful this time. An important one for me was the environment group. And as it isn't on our agenda today, I thought it would be a good opportunity to just hear from people where they are. Could I have a show of hands, first of all, who know about the route map to zero carbon? Just have you heard about it? Is it on the agenda? Right. Show of hands for how many people are engaged with the eco-church process. Right. Well, I think what I'll give you today is enabling people to get fully involved in that and for you to start the thinking, because actually it is very accessible at an early stage, an extremely helpful process. So we had an excellent input into the environment group about the route map. But I wanted to share with you today the opportunities that the Church of England provide. There are some extremely good webinars available, and there's a newsletter that keeps you in touch with what's available. I've got, if you've seen a leaflet like this about, on the reverse, if you're good at QR codes, there are ways of getting involved. But if you go to the Church of England website and look for the environment programme, you'll find ways to sign up for the newsletter and also for particular topics around heating, case studies. It really is a very well stocked and very accessible. Their webinars are very compact, so you're committing an hour, but it's a well-packed hour and an opportunity to ask questions. So that was one important fringe meeting that I went to, and the environment group on General Synod are very active, and so are the officers within Church of England. So I'll leave that with you. And the other one, the other fringe meeting that was important to us personally is that we had a fringe meeting about the situation in Palestine, and it was supported by Christian Aid, who'd brought out recently their Where is Palestine report, looking at the current picture. It was supported by Omar Harami of Sabeel, Jerusalem. So he was online with us and was able to take a full part in the panel. I spoke about our motion and invited people to join a network of support in General Synod for the motion. And Charlotte of Sabeel Kairos UK spoke about their Investing for Peace programme. We're progressing all those informally with, for example, the Ethical Investment Advisory Group of the Church of England. So we're preparing for that motion, which may come forward in about 2 or 3 years. It's in a queue. But in the meantime, we're looking to build support across General Synod for a broader understanding of the issues and a way forward. that we long for to see in the Holy Land. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions to our General Synod reps? Thank you. I can't see who you are.
Tudor.
Oh, thank you, Tudor.
Yes, just noticed in the report, thank you for this, the Diocesan Synod motion from Canterbury on qualifications for PCC membership and entry on electoral rolls. I'd love to hear a bit more about that.
I think you can access the full paper online, I believe.
I missed that.
Oh, right. No, it doesn't ring a bell. Sorry.
I think we need to direct you to the resources on the Church of England website. I'm not sure how far it went because it has been a perennial problem.
Christine might have some. We share out what we attend because we can't be there for absolutely everything in the chamber.
Everything I say will be inaccurate, but the whole point of it was that if you've got a Fresh Expressions church or a church where people are unchurched and they're wanting to belong and they're Christian, but their background, they haven't been baptised, haven't been confirmed, then it's a way of helping those people to belong, to be part of the PCC, but they don't necessarily fit the mould that we've had in the past. So I think that's continuing to be explored. As far as I know, could have got it wrong. Okay.
Thank you. Oh, we have a question from Jane.
It's not a question, it's just one of the other fringe events that that a few of us went to was about the launch of this book, How Village Churches Thrive. And Bishop James very generously bought a large number of these because it's very relevant to the diocese. And I know that quite a few of these have gone out to people, but I still have some in a box in my car. So if you haven't had one, and particularly if you're in the southern part of the diocese, then just come and speak to me because there are still some left. Thank you. You've got some as well. Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any more questions about General Synod? If not, we'll move on to the Lambeth Conference. So thank you very much to all those who serve our diocese on the General Synod. Do you want to sit?
Just a word or two about the Lambeth Conference that took place from the 27th of July to the 7th of August. Unfortunately, I had to arrive a couple of days late for it because I was having a pacemaker fitted. The great thing was that by the time I got there, I was totally bionic and was bounding around like one of those sort of bunnies, you know, in the Duracell adverts. But I did miss the official photos, so there's no proof of my being there, but I promise you I was. It took place in Canterbury at the University of Kent. Very large campus, those of you who know the University of Kent. And we reckoned, because somebody had one of those Fitbit things, you know, on his wrist, we reckoned all of us were walking about 5 or 6 miles every day, which was just as well, because the meals were quite large. But between the talks and the seminars and the meals and the worship, all of which, for reasons best known to the organisers, were in different places. The intention of the Lambeth Conference is that it should happen every 10 years. This one was actually 15 years after the last one, which was in 2008. I was at that. There weren't actually, interestingly, all that many of us there at the Lambeth Conference who'd been at the previous one. But for COVID reasons, when it was meant to happen, it couldn't. What was absolutely brilliant was that the person who was organising it all had, at the very last moment, ticked a little box on the insurance form which said, in case of pandemic. Now, he had absolutely no idea, of course, that COVID was going to come, and it was quite an expensive premium, but he thought, well, you know, you just never know. It saved the Church of England £5 million, that particular tick, so he was rather grateful for it. I think the insurance company was rather less grateful. There were about 1,200 delegates at the the conference, so it was pretty big. 650 bishops from literally all over the world, their spouses in many cases, church officials, interpreters, because it took place inevitably in English, but with translations going on, and we all had earphones to wear, stewards, musicians, including one of our curates, Hannah Wallace, who was there and played a significant part in the absolutely brilliant music group, security, ecumenical representatives, and so on and so on. Literally from all over the Anglican Communion, which consists of about 70 million Anglicans, though not, sadly, from Nigeria, Uganda, or Rwanda. The theme of the conference was God's Church for God's World, and the idea was that we should walk, listen, and witness together, and we were doing that given an extraordinary and very rich diversity of contexts and backgrounds. The programme was put together by a sort of international design team and a working group, another way in which Carlisle Diocese was well involved in the Lambeth Conference. The working group was led by Emma Einson, former, of course, Bishop of Penrith. 3 phases, online conversations that took place for the year or so beforehand between bishops in different parts of the world. The conference itself, and now witnessing together, which is the phase we're in at the moment of implementing the so-called Lambeth calls. There were no resolutions this time for a variety of reasons. And at the conference, there were a number of demonstrations and protests, including, interestingly, a pro-LGBTQ plus march across the campus arranged by the university staff. Main ingredients of the conference were retreats for bishops and spouses separately. I can't comment on that because that was a bit sadly that I missed, but people enjoyed that. Regular worship, there was a Eucharist, morning prayer, evening prayer and Compline every day, led by the different provinces with very different styles, with wonderful music reflecting the place that the worship was coming from by the music group, and of course some services in the magnificent cathedral in Canterbury. Bible expositions on 1 Peter, which was the book of the week, that's what we were studying, by Archbishop Justin, and Bible study groups also on 1 Peter. And as at the last Lambeth Conference, that was an opportunity really to get to know a handful of bishops from other parts of the world. In my group, there were 3 of us from the UK, which was an unusually large number actually, 1 from Jamaica, 1 from southern Sudan, 1 from Japan, 1 from South Africa, and 1 from Malawi. Though unfortunately the Malawian never turned up, which we never quite understood, because he was at the conference, but whether he couldn't find the place or not, I don't know, because it was quite difficult. There were some fascinating discussions and different insights. For instance, you may remember the verse in 1 Peter, which says, "Your adversary, the devil, like a roaring lion, prowls around, seeking someone to devour." It appears in the Compline service. That was fantastic, because the bishop from southern Sudan talked about his actual battles with roaring lions when he'd had hand-to-hand combat with lions. And that has put the whole thing in a slightly different context for me. At least what we didn't have was what we had last time in 2008, when I was a group leader and we had a southern Sudanese bishop in the group. We were studying John's Gospel then, and somehow every verse in John's Gospel, according to him, seemed to refer to polygamy, which was his biggest problem. And this, after a while, we rather ran out of things to say about polygamy. And I, as the group leader, had to kind of sort that one out, which was a delicate business. Plenary sessions, including the spouses, with keynote addresses by the Archbishop of Canterbury. I worked out that Archbishop Justin in the end gave 8 one-hour addresses during the conference. He needed a jolly good holiday afterwards, but he did extremely well, if that doesn't sound too patronizing. Had a day at Lambeth Palace with the theme of environment, and lunch for all the delegates in a huge marquee in the Lambeth Palace Gardens, and an opportunity to admire the new library building, which those of you who've been there will have seen. It's at the bottom of the garden, houses the entire Lambeth book collection, with rooms for study and lectures and so on, and is very impressive. There were a number of plenary discussions, I say plenary, it was just the bishops together, of the various Lambeth calls. The Lambeth calls were on science and faith, on the environment and sustainable development, on discipleship, Christian unity, mission and evangelism, safe church, Anglican identity, reconciliation, and human dignity. Human dignity was the theme which attracted most press attention, because there was a reference to the Lambeth Resolution 110 from 1998 about sexuality. But actually, as I hope the listing of all those themes will have indicated, sexuality was a small and very measured part of even the human dignity call, which also covered colonialism, slavery, and poverty, and which emphasized very strongly the inherent dignity and equality of all human beings. You may have read in the press a letter from Sandy Toksvig, the broadcaster, about the human dignity call. I have huge regard for Sandy Toksvig. I think she's absolutely brilliant, but I do think she slightly got the wrong end of the stick as to what was going on actually in that call. And there was a masterly introduction to it by the Archbishop of Canterbury, and it led to a near unanimous acceptance of this call, which was remarkable given the huge range of viewpoints and attitudes in the room, ranging from southern Sudan to the Episcopal Church in America. Welby called for balance and honesty over our very real differences, and pleaded with us not to treat each other lightly or carelessly. We are called by Christ himself, he said, both to truth and unity. And actually, it was an astonishing outcome from that conversation and call. And despite what all the newspapers said, sex was hardly at the forefront of the Lambeth discussions. It occupied 1 hour out of 11 days of conversation. And the rest got relatively little press coverage, which I think simply illustrates the fact that the church is not such big news nowadays. There were statements of support for everything and everyone, from the Anglican Church of the Congo through to, of course, the people of Ukraine, and from the people of Myanmar, undergoing terrible time at the moment, to the indigenous people in Canada and throughout the world. The spouses, of whom there were quite a large number, particularly from Africa, had so-called strengthening sessions. Now, these weren't kind of weightlifting and exercises. They involved talks and conversations and a sharing of the different kinds of roles that bishops' spouses have around the world. We saw this, of course, particularly when we had our link in India with Chennai, Madras, and we used to go over there, and Alison had her own title, which is Bishop Amma, and Bishop Amma has a role not totally unlike that of a bishop in the diocese as a whole. There were lots of seminars. I attended quite a number of them, including Unity in the Anglican Communion and Building a Confident, Science-Engaged Church across the Anglican Communion. I think that's really important. It's run by something called ECLAS. Can't remember what that stands for at the moment, but anyway, it's all about bringing together science and faith, something I've been involved with from its start, and is really developing and growing. It's been supported by the Templeton Foundation and runs seminars for leading scientists from around the world, along with theologians and church leaders. And there was some evening entertainment, including an evening at the Old Palace and one or two films, which I thought were very poorly attended. I mean, I was in there with the films absolutely straight away. And one was called Don't Look Up with Leonardo DiCaprio. I don't know if you've seen that one, which is quite interesting, not least as they all prayed at the end when the world was about to be destroyed by an asteroid. Anyway, that's another matter. It was a fairly busy agenda, very little free time, and very complex logistics. I think rather too complex for some of those who were there, who ended up hardly going to anything, which was a pity. Main value of the Lambeth Conference, I think as ever, was the relationships that developed. I was able to have some good chats with the new Bishop of Zululand, one of our link dioceses, who we found it very difficult to communicate with in any other way, and hopefully we'll be having a lot more communication, particularly personal communication and visits either way in the not too distant future. But also very rich content. I learnt a lot while I was there, and once again was reminded of the fact that the Church of England is a very small, though very significant part of a huge global communion of brothers and sisters who call themselves Anglican. A global communion that some would describe now as a coalition who live together in what is sometimes called reconciled diversity. And we'll be having quite a lot more about reconciled diversity as we talk further about living in love and faith in the coming months. Thank you.
Thank you. Disappointed there was no Indiana Jones films.
No Indiana, no, none.
Very disappointing.
None, utterly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, thank you very much, Bishop James. I'm now going to invite you to lead on the next item as well, which is the God for All.
Thank you very much. Bishop Rob is going to do part of this presentation as well, and I'm looking to somebody to change the slides as we go along here. I think it's going to happen, isn't it? Oh, you are. Thank you very much. I was looking at the back, which was not very clever. Thank you very much indeed. Well, this is, in essence, the presentation that we're going to be giving in roadshows around the county over the coming months. You'll remember the roadshows that we had for Growing Disciples, and then for the first iteration of God for All. These will be hopefully opportunities for lots of people to get in touch with the latest developments around Cumbria's refreshed ecumenical vision and strategy. And it's still called God for All. And the leaders of our four partner denominations, you know, Anglican, Methodist, United Reformed and Salvation Army, are very conscious of the fact that this needs to be owned. People need to be kept abreast of what we're up to and able to feed in their thoughts and comments about it as we implement the vision and strategy. And as we do this, we're very grateful for the fact that this refreshed God for All vision has emerged from a huge amount of feedback from all the churches and chapels and the Salvation Army cause that was received back in 2019, seems a long time ago now, when the decision was first made to take a fresh look at God for All. And that's been essential in helping us to shape where we're going And I'll say a bit more about that in a moment. So, what I want to do now is just explain where we're up to as we continue to grow disciples of Jesus across our county. If we can have the next slide, please. This is an opportunity for us to consider what a flourishing church in Cumbria could look like, while not shying away from addressing the very considerable challenges of which we're all aware and that we face day by day. Not least the continued financial fallout from the coronavirus pandemic, the effect that pandemic has had on church attendance, and the fatigue that so many church leaders locally, lay and ordained, continue to feel. And of course, in some cases, long COVID, which has had a very dire effect. So, real challenges. We've got to be open to facing them. But I hope that you and everyone, as we go around the diocese, will be encouraged and energized by a vision which is rooted in two things, both of them mentioned there: hope on the one hand and realism on the other. The hope is the hope that we have in our loving, bountiful God who delivers on his promises. The hope we have of eternal life, the hope we have of life beyond death, the hope we have that God is with us wherever we are and whatever we are doing. But also the realism about where we find ourselves as churches and worshipping communities. I don't think anybody's going to be frightfully impressed if we go around pretending that everything is absolutely fantastic and, we're growing everywhere and all that, because that isn't the case. And also realism about the resources we have available to us. And we're trying to be bold in our approach. Now, this is not a popular word just at the moment in our country. I'm very conscious of the fact that bold strategies for growth are not quite flavour of the month just at the minute, so I hesitate even to mention this one. But, of course, we are bold, we are courageous, I hope, in going down this track, because that's part of what it means to be Christian. And it's our faith, the faith that Rob was talking about earlier on in the Bible reading, which creates a critical bridge between hope on the one hand and realism on the other. So a quick reminder of how we've got to this point. Next slide. We had 100 days of prayer. That was what began the whole process, and prayer continues to be at the root of this work, everything that's going on. That was, again, back in 2019, began on Pentecost Sunday, ended on September the 17th, and we were all praying for guidance, for a refreshed vision through that prayer. Daily prayers were available for download on the Godful website, and 25,000 Vision Refresh prayer cards were distributed across the county. Next slide. We went on then to 100 days of listening. In fact, it went on slightly longer than 100 days, doing a lot of listening, 116 days, I think, but no one seemed to mind that. And during that time, there were various resources that were offered to help people feed in their thoughts about the refresh process, and especially to consider what our priorities should be as we move forwards. Encouragingly, more than 1,500 people, as groups and individuals, responded to these days of listening. There was an online tool and a survey which helped us to think about our top 4 priorities for the coming years, and a chance for people to feed back what they felt God had been saying during the praying time, the 100 days of prayer. And from that, we have the 4 themes which are on the little bookmark that you've got on your place and on the leaflet that has been produced, with which we're all familiar by now, I hope. Even I can say them without having to look at a bit of paper. And they've been adopted by all our partner denominations. Follow daily, care deeply, speak boldly, and tread gently. Follow daily, of course, is about discipleship, represents our commitment to help each other to follow Jesus more closely, growing as his disciples in every aspect of our lives, corporately and as individuals. This is in some ways a continuation of our growing disciples theme from a few years back. Caring deeply is about listening to our local communities, trying to discern what the particular needs are of the people around us, responding in loving service, trying to transform injustice where we find it, to challenge oppression, to pursue peace and reconciliation. It's about the pastoral care and concern for other people which undergirds everything we do. And we saw a lot of this. I was immensely encouraged by what we saw during the pandemic, people caring for those in their communities, and of course the food banks and people being telephoned and so on. Speaking boldly is reflecting a pledge to share our faith in Jesus in everyday ways, trying to connect up with everybody, especially the people who are least represented in our churches. And we're trying to do this in both time-honoured, as we now call it, some call it traditional, but time-honoured ways, and pioneering ways. And that continues the evangelistic thrust of the first 5 years of God for All, where the emphasis was very, very heavily on evangelism. And then in Treading Gently, we're striving to safeguard the integrity of God's creation, to sustain and renew the life of the earth. This is about the environment and our calling to be good stewards of God's earth, with the extraordinary challenge of climate change surrounding us. Well, those 4 themes are at the very core of our refreshed God for All vision and strategy. They're the central tenets of our ecumenical commitment, and we had hoped that that would all be launched in the autumn of 2020, and work was completed on new branding in readiness to launch in January 2021, and then, of course, next slide, we had COVID. And just as the COVID pandemic and the various lockdowns had a huge impact on all of our lives, so it did too on the planned rollout of the refreshed vision and strategy. And not surprisingly, the vision and strategy had to take a bit of a back seat as we began to explore what church looked like under all these new circumstances in the short term, and actually now in the medium and longer term as well. It has changed so much. And so it was agreed there should be a time for prayerful reflection, time to pause, see what God might be saying to us through the pandemic, and how the refreshed vision would play out in the new world in which we're all now living. Some call it post-pandemic, but as we've just heard, actually, there's a new spike in COVID, so we're not through, and I don't suppose we probably ever will be, COVID altogether. So we're post-pandemic as well as post-trust, post-truth, and post-postmodern. In fact, we're very post nowadays. We're post-people.
And the post on strike.
Post what?
And on strike, post.
Thank you very much. So it's been quite a long 2.5 years, I think, for all of us in many ways. But the time hasn't been wasted. And new way of working has developed. We've all become experts on Zoom and Microsoft Teams. even me. And despite the restrictions imposed by the pandemic, we've had lots of online meetings, a lot of work committed to the development of this refreshed vision. And in a moment or two, we'll explain more about where that's taken us. But first of all, next slide, a word or two about our mission communities, because it's really important to state our absolute commitment to the mission communities that have been created in this county. Groupings of mutually supportive and mission-centred churches. And as resources become ever tighter, the need for effective mission communities becomes even more imperative as we try to maintain a Christian presence in every community and keep church local. And it's interesting that I think about 8 other dioceses are now picking up on this idea of mission communities, and the whole of the Church of Scotland, which I liaise with as the Church of England's sort of representative, is wanting to adopt our ecumenical mission community strategy. I think it's fair to say that although we've been talking about mission communities for about 9 or 10 years now here in Cumbria, there's still quite a lot of confusion around as to what they actually are and what they represent. And there's been quite a lot of ups and downs in terms of their formation. We've still got some way to go, but they remain the basic building blocks from which our refreshed God for all vision can be delivered. So let me just explain again briefly what we consider to be the main hallmarks of mission communities. They should be, first of all, collaborative in their approach. Collaborative between denominations, we're talking about all Christians here, between different communities, between clergy and laity, between church and community. It's about working together. They should be prayerful, praying together regularly as a priority. They should be ecumenical, being Christian first and foremost, and presenting a united common purpose in witness in Christ's name, with a shared strategy in each mission community for mission, for what's going to be done and how it's going to be done. And that's very, very important. One of the chief barriers to Christian witness in this country is reckoned to be the disunity of Christians. Resourceful, sharing our gifts, sharing our resources, not least of people, but also sometimes of buildings, and by pulling together to fund projects which individual churches couldn't. Some might also say relational, resourceful, relational, and local, with an emphasis and focus on planning around local needs and opportunities, rather than thinking that these are centrally imposed, with focal or local leadership in each church, however small that church may be. That is a really important feature of mission communities, which I think probably hasn't been grasped completely around the county. And then mutually accountable, by recognizing the impact our actions and our omissions may have on one another, and being accountable to each other and to God, and of course to our denominational leadership. So one or two things that mission communities are not. They're not just about rationalization or a central decision-making process, or about closing churches and cutting clergy. I've heard people say all of those things about mission communities. Oh, you're just doing this because you want to get rid of our clergy and close our church. That really is not the intention by no means. It's not about centralization of power or decision-making. It's actually about subsidiarity, about trying to have more decision-making taking place locally. It's not about structural change, because even without a mission-centred approach, the most beautiful structures are meaningless. And it's not about exclusivism. Sometimes a little bit of tension arises between churches together groups and what's going on ecumenically in mission communities. Where there are good churches together networks, and there are lots of those, and other important denominational links, let them flourish. And that applies to our companion denominations as well. The Roman Catholics, the Baptists, the Church of Scotland, the Quakers, all of whom are on board. And in some of our mission communities, well, in one, a Baptist minister is one of the joint mission community leaders. In several, Roman Catholics are very strongly involved. Quakers and Church of Scotland are very much on board. Every mission community works in different ways. There's no prescriptive model. There has never been. But there are plenty of opportunities to learn from each other. And we wanted to take this opportunity to show you just a very brief film which features one of our mission community leaders, whom many here will know, Reverend Graham Skinner. What he's talking about isn't necessarily a model which will work in your context. That's not a problem. But Graham explains the rationale that he's brought to the leadership of the Eden Wild Goose Mission Community that is based just to the east of Carlisle. So if we can have the film. Many thanks to Graham for being willing to do that. And he's also very involved with the whole sanctuary project with refugees. And that's part of what the mission community is engaging with. And that's how he's approaching his role as mission community leader. You may be doing things completely differently in your mission community. That's fine, because we have such a variety of communities around. I talked about a flourishing church in Cumbria. What does that mean to different people? Last December, Graham was one of a group of 24 people who were asked to present to an ecumenical panel of church leaders and others. And they were all asked the same question: what does a thriving expression of church or mission or faith look like in your context? And the people who were invited, including representatives from all our 4 partner denominations, lay and ordained, and represented a complete cross-section of churches and communities. And the presentations that they gave helped to inform the support and development of this God for all vision and strategy. And again, they're part of our commitment to listen to what is going on locally and take on board what's working well in the context in which local ministry is being very faithfully delivered. And we were thrilled to hear a host of ways in which God is working his plan out in Cumbria. It was incredibly encouraging, I think, for all those who were there to listen to, and it reinforced the need for openness and local accountability as being right at the heart of what we're trying to do. And it helped us a little to understand more about how we should look to the ongoing rollout of our strategy. How can we be a little freer in style? Well, how can we be a bit like this?
Now, I bet you're wondering what on earth that's got to do with what I'm going to say next. But what an amazing thing. Well, didn't that look like fun? Didn't you really kind of, even for those of you like me who can't play an instrument apart from kind of attempting the spoons every so often, you might think, well, how can I join with that? But actually, that's our picture of what we envisage about how mission communities can work. what we saw there was a group of musicians who took a kind of central melody. There was something that was running through the middle of that, and then each of them in their solo bits took a phrase or fashioned their notes, where they did the timing, and then all coming back at the end to the central theme for the big finish. So each person is sort of contributing a different bit to it and able to sort of improvise on their bit, but they are united by a central theme. Each person giving of their gifts, their skill, creating something beautiful, which all works together, different but working together and united around a central theme. And I guess that sometimes when you hear that sort of thing, and each one would, I guess if they'd done it another time, it would have been different. And we might wonder how on earth it's all going to come back together, but it does. And that's how we see our journey as the church in Cumbria. And what we're talking about is a sense of faithful improvisation, because across the churches of Cumbria, we and the mission communities of Cumbria, we are different, and there are different things that we're being called to play in each place. There's a different tune, because we're different people. Each church community will be full of people with different skills, different gifts. There'll be different needs in that place. And so actually we are playing, in a sense, a slightly different part in the overall music that God is calling us to play. But the important thing is that we're not all going off on our own thing. It doesn't become a cacophony of all sorts of different sounds. There's a unity of purpose, a unity of melody. And that's God's melody. The song, the tune that God is calling us to play in praise to Him, and which will speak of His love and His grace and His beauty to the world around us. And each one of us, in our different ways and our different places, are going to be a call to play our part, to improvise our piece of music in each place. So this faithful improvisation, we are doing our bit, but it's faithful to what we have received and where the music's going next. We're not totally free, but we're free to give joyful response to what's going on. Some people see this sometimes like a play. You have sometimes people talk about God's work in history is like a 5-act play. We've had the first 3 acts, we know where it's going, and we're in Act 4, and actually we're having to improvise what Act 4 is in such a way that it's faithful to what's gone before and is heading for where we know God is going to. But actually we're trying to work it out. And that what we do today can't be incongruent with what's gone before or just a complete diversion. It has to fit so that the story, the great sweep of God's salvation story in history, kind of goes from where it has been to where it's going. And we play our part. We improvise in that part of the play. We play our part in the music of that moment. Faithful improvisation. And this is the way that we can see that our churches and mission communities can work. Because we can't impose, and we should never impose from above, a way of doing stuff. And so often what we read about in the church press and elsewhere is that there's going to be a homogenization of the church. And that's absolutely what we're not saying. We're saying instead, actually, how will church work out where we are, in the places that God has called us to be, in the ways that God has called us to be in that place. Faithful improvisation. You'll be pleased to know you get about 3 minutes now to stop listening to me and just to turn to the person next to you and maybe think, how are the ways in which in your mission community, your church community, you are working out this idea of faithful improvisation? You might even say, I don't quite get this, and maybe you could explain it to one another. So 3 minutes, because we're pushing on time. I saw this amazing collective worship this week, where the person doing the collective worship had given the children sweets and got them to move, and then managed to get them all back together again really quickly. So I thought I'm going to ask him how he does it, especially with sweets. So can I have just the next slide, please? So crucial to our strategy are our mission communities. We aren't going to suddenly lurch off and do something else. All the work that's been put into developing mission communities is what we are building on. Now, in some places, of course, those mission communities are really going well. They're really developed, and the relationships are really good. In other places, we've still got a lot of work to do, but we're not diverting from that strategy. These remain the cornerstones which support a shared perspective of mission for our refreshed God for all vision. We want to recognize 4 areas which are key to our understanding of mission. That firstly, we have a strength in diversity. We believe that there is strength in having diverse, vibrant, and locally driven mission, which is being lived out through local churches working together for the sake of reaching everybody in their communities. God for all. Reaching them with the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ. So that actually God has put us together. There's a diversity and strength in that, with those different gifts in different places. Certainly living in hope. Now, I want to say that I am really hopeful for the church. I don't for the most part worry about the future of the church, because it is God's church. And God will see his work being done through the church. We don't need to worry about the future of the church. That's above our pay grade, above our responsibility, that God will sustain his church and do the work that he has for the church to do in the world. We believe that there is potential, that where we are faithful and where we are stepping out, that the church can grow and be sustained as we share the hope of Christ around us, as we give of ourselves, as we seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and then the other things will be added to us as well. But also, alongside our confidence in God is a recognition that we do face challenges. There is a decline in attendance. We do struggle with money and finance. And so actually, how do we steward the things that God has already given us? Steward what we have at the moment to best serve our mission. So we live in hope, but also with a healthy dose of reality. And then a local is key. That the local church matters. The locality and geography of our area and the holiness of a place is important in all that we do in our mission. And I want to say this is a thing that I've found helpful. We're committed to become place, this quote says, because there is no division between sacred and secular. God saw what he had made and declared it to be good. So too, we value what God has made and the place he has called us to. Just as God became incarnate in Jesus Christ in a real time and a real place, so too do we seek to incarnate Christ in the real places that he sends us to. We are committed to serving and loving a place, even when others have moved on, because it is made, seen, and loved by God, and he has come into the world to make beautiful what has been broken, neglected, or forgotten. So local is key. This isn't about spreading it out and spreading jam out over an ever thinner space. It's about how best the mission communities support the local. And then finally, it's discipling all. We want, in the end, more Christians being more Christian. That's the key. More Christians being more Christian. We want to support discipleship growth within the existing church communities and encourage new people to explore faith. This includes both support for mission communities to build capability and confidence in sharing together in a collaborative approach to mission, and targeted support for specific groups of leaders. And in having this shared understanding of mission, we hope to show that with hope and confidence in the promises of God, each expression or incarnation of church should and can be enabled to flourish, thus recognizing our shared calling into the wider mission of the church as we seek to participate in and respond to the mission of God, alive and at work in the world, to reach those who are yet to encounter God for themselves. So mission communities are the cornerstone, the basis, the foundation of what we're doing. And how they work out locally is part of this faithful improvisation. And in support of this, we are developing a number of key strategies. Now, these are for the diocese to have as a key strategies. These aren't 7 things that mission communities now need to do. These are instead things that we as a diocese together will work out to support the work that you are doing locally. So, and these strategies came as a result of our discussions as part of the refresh. So first of all, the first strategy is a ministry strategy, which will help the local church discern and release all the ministry it has. So we believe that God has already given us what we need. So how do we steward what God has already given us? How do we help discern people's gifts? And of course, so much of that is happening already. We're looking for, not just for people to do stuff, but what are the gifts that people have to support mission and ministry? And that mission and ministry is not just about keeping church going, but more importantly, supporting people in their ministry and mission that they have in their working life. How is church refreshing them for the work of the kingdom that they're doing as a business person, as a cleaner, as a teacher, as a town planner? All these places where actually we spend most of the week. So how do we support that? How do we develop these gifts and support them? But also, how can those gifts be fostered and nurtured to lead, develop, support, improvise in the local church? So we've got a vocation strategy, and Peter, I think Peter's here, but in the future roadshows, Peter will be with us to talk to about that. But our belief that we're called to follow that, and that calling, whoever we are, is exciting and diverse. We're working together as the body of Christ, that all have a gift and all have a calling. So our strategy for our vocations advisors and developing vocations, but also the discipleship course. And if we could have that video, please. Great. So I hope maybe you'll know people who might really benefit from doing that course with Nikki. So a ministry strategy that is about the encouragement, the nurturing, the enabling of ministry in all its forms across mission areas. And one of the things that we've been able to do, we're able to announce today, is that, for instance, in terms of some of ordained leadership in mission communities, we've managed to secure some funding nationally for extra curates to serve in mission communities, but also some posts of first responsibility for those people who've just come out of a curacy, to be able to appoint some extra people who are coming out of their curacy to new posts in mission communities, which is a really exciting development, and it's been really great. And thank you to those who've worked so hard to get that money from the National Church to support that. So a ministry strategy, and then a buildings strategy. The overall aim of a building strategy is to get the right number of fit-for-purpose church buildings in the right locations. And this is achieved by talking about our churches together, our church buildings together, and then creating a local, actionable buildings plan for every mission community. And then those locally drawn up plans would govern what money is spent on building fabric and where. We understand that upkeep of buildings can create a huge drain on resources. So support will be given to help mission communities look at efficiencies, which will then free up other people for other aspects of God's work. We want to create fit-for-purpose buildings. Now, we know that there are many buildings which do a lot of our mission work for us because they are a place of, they are a precious place. But there are other places where actually the building isn't doing the work for us, is in fact hampering us. So locally, we're working out a sort of rationalisation and how we then support people in producing fit-for-purpose buildings. So next one will be the digital strategy. The COVID pandemic, as we know, has seen a seismic shift towards a hybrid society in which more and more focus is placed on digital platforms. As churches, we need to remain up with the game in this constantly evolving world. Even Bishop James is on Zoom now. We all know your love of, you're an early adopter, we know. So the digital strategy has 6 main priorities. To get the digital things through everything we plan and do, so that digital is part of what we do in everything. That we equip more people to take on digital roles and be good at them, to be able to be confident with digital things. And then also produce easy ways for people to produce digital content that attracts and engages people, like the videos we've just seen. But also provide people with clear guidance on how to use digital platforms well. That's a bit of a minefield, isn't it? So actually we help people to know how to do that well. And then also to ensure that young people are better represented online and included in digital roles and in the content creation. And so through that work, build a culture of innovation in our digital work. So that's our digital strategy. And then next, a growing younger strategy. And this is currently a 5-point plan around a growing younger strategy, which would see the creation of new worshipping communities that are culturally able to welcome young people. And we are going to continue our investment in Network Youth Church. So for instance, as a diocese, we have committed now to providing a Network Youth Church leader in every deanery, and for that to be financed centrally, so that deaneries and relation communities don't have to finance that themselves. But also, I want to say this about Network Youth Church. Some people think, oh, well, if I have a Network Youth Church leader, if I want to have a youth worker or a children's worker, I can't do that now. That's not the case. Actually, Network Youth Church leaders are a key part of our strategy, but supporting those places particularly that don't have much going on at the moment. And if other churches are able to support that work and bring in other resources, then that's great. Please do that. But but we are committed to Network Youth Church and their leaders, and we're going to be providing that centrally, so that we know that's happening in every place. But also, the growing under strategy is about supporting and investing. So where we find that the growing under work is already working. And we're going to be looking to, in our recruitment, to how we find leaders and others who are really good at leading amongst young people and reaching out to that into emerging cultures. And our school strategy. So 3 key areas have been identified as part of a school strategy, which would support an intentional, consistent, coordinated approach to ministry to and via our schools, to build on and further develop good practice on the part of the Board of Education, but also mission community leaders and teams and pioneering or youth ministers. And these include an emphasis around growing together with mission communities and church leaders, a promotion of a mixed ecology, that is, different ways of growing, approaches to growing church communities, how best to share good practice and identify opportunities, and growing disciples, and improving the offering for pupils nearing the end of primary school to help them in that transition and to grow in their spiritual life. And then an eco strategy, because we know that we have a responsibility when we talk about tread gently to our development of how we as an organisation, as church communities, are impacting our planet. We have to make efforts to help our different church communities achieve a target that we've been set for net carbon zero by 2030. And so the strategy will draw on 3 key components of all the work that's already being done. So firstly, about reaching net zero carbon emissions. Also measuring the energy footprint of our churches and other buildings. And then a strategy about how we protect and enhance biodiversity. And we're going to draw on the resources from agencies such as Eco Church and the Rocha, and also the God for All environmental Facebook group will continue to offer a forum to share and support each other. And again, one of the initiatives one of the things that we can announce today is that as a diocese, we're going to be providing LED lighting for, first of all, for if anybody lives in a vicarage, for our clergy, if there are some terms and conditions to the offer of LED lights. But firstly, if you're living in a vicarage and you want to change over your light bulbs to LED lighting, then we will pay for that. LED lighting lasts so much longer and uses so much less in terms of energy. And as churches, we want to look for grants and to enable churches to make that transition too. And we are also looking at how we can support schools in transferring to LED lighting. Our next strategy is about church planting and pioneering. We've done a lot of work about pioneering over the last few years, developing new communities, new Christian communities, and we're looking at how there'll be places where mission communities want to plant a new worshiping community. So how will we do that? How will we develop that? And also how will we make this shift to encourage all churches, all mission communities across the county to think missionally, to reach out in different ways, to engage with people who are not currently part of church and who would never darken our doors. So we're developing a strategy at the moment, which is one of the ones that we haven't completed yet, which is about how to develop our strategy for church planting and pioneering, encouraging mission across the board in different places, but also where might we specifically found new Christian communities. And one of the ways in which we're going to support some of that is through, you'll know about the Diocesan Growth Fund, which people can apply to for larger grants, but now there will be a grant of £250 available to every church community who asks for it, to try something new. So there will be details coming out about how to do that. So £250 will be available to anybody, any church community who wants it, just to try something new in their outreach. So a number of different strategies. Again, these are not all things that you all have to do and you have to put on your PCC agendas. They're ways in which, as a collective diocese, we're looking to support the work of individual mission communities as you faithfully improvise where you are. Okay, put you on there.
So hopefully that's a sort of summary. It's quite a brief summary. There's lots more that we could have said about some of the work that's been going on in recent months. Still a lot to do, still lots of questions that remain to be answered. There's still budgets to be ratified that'll fund the work, and we're looking quite hard at external funding streams to support some of the particular projects. But the crucial thing is, I hope will have been apparent, there is a plan in all this. It needs to be scrutinised, but basically we're looking at a flourishing church in Cumbria, not just Church of England, a flourishing church of Christians in Cumbria. It's not going to happen straight away. This is a 10-year project. And over that time, we'll be taking frequent looks at what's going on and how it's going, thinking about how God is moving in particular ways, in particular areas, and how best we can tap into that, rather in the way that Graham Skinner was describing. And of course, next slide, while it's impossible to say exactly what each flourishing church will look like, and they're all going to be slightly different, the vision and strategy does help us to navigate a way forward, hopefully with that mixture of realism and hope that we've mentioned several times. And we're looking at this navigation as the parable of a garden. Now, I wouldn't really to be talking about this, it ought to be my wife who's here, but unfortunately she couldn't be here because her garden is open to the public today, and so she's feeding them all tea and cake. But rather, as Jesus told parables throughout the Gospels, we want to see a sort of picture of how the church in Cumbria can flourish. Those of you who are gardeners, most of us have a garden, know that working in a garden involves preparing the soil. involves sowing and planting and pruning and grafting and fertilizing and overseeing the whole lot and inspiring and building up the next generation of gardeners. Sometimes it can involve a little bit of benign neglect and allowing God space to work. Healthy garden doesn't have to be large to be a place of growth and reproduction and abundance. And I think that's a very important principle here. It doesn't have to be huge, it can be very small, but still very beautiful and flourishing. And a healthy garden is structured around the well-established plants, the ones that have deep roots, that have a visible presence, that have been there for quite a while. But it's also a place of new varieties, certainly true in our garden. If you want to see where my stipend has gone, just come and take a look around, because there are always sort of new plants and new things and breads being redeveloped and reorganized and so on and so on. And sometimes you just have to let things grow to see if they're going to work and then reorganize them perhaps a bit when you see that one is crowding another or whatever. Healthy garden contains the past and the present and a bit of future vision within it. And some of the features of our I think that's it actually. No, yeah, okay. No, I think we'll go back to that one. Yeah, fine, thanks. We've got a whole lot of things there. The well-established plants, which are the traditional patterns of ministry that remain deeply embedded in our communities. We are not wanting to say we don't want those are passé, those are past. No, they're really important. They are a basis for everything we're doing. They may change over time, but the transition is gradual. The grafts, where you take something that's already well established and grow something new out of it. And those perhaps are our fresh expressions in the church, roots based on the traditional elements of Christian worship and mission, but the way it looks is very different. And we now have a very large number of fresh expressions in Cumbria. I think at the last count, something like 160 audited and established fresh expressions around the county, all very different, all flourishing. The cuttings in a garden, cuttings taken from parts of a well-established plant, placed in new soil, and that relates to the whole idea of church planting that Bishop Rob was talking about a moment ago. The seeds, where we take seeds and sow them and see what's going to grow, and that's our pioneering ministry. We have got quite a number of pioneers now in the county, many of them funded by our Reaching Deeper programme, which has money coming to it from the church commissioners. We want to be sure that all the pioneering that takes place is integrated with what's going on in our mission communities. So it's not two separate things happening. It is part of, a very important part of the mission, and has an accountability within the ecumenical county. And of course we've got the Pioneer Hub just down the road in Penrith, the Northern Mission Centre, very exciting, training pioneers from all over the north of England. It's the equivalent of a hub down near Oxford, which serves the south. And we're doing that in partnership with the Church Mission Society. And then working the soil. There's a lot of that. That's the hard work we're doing day by day, all of us, and includes the digital platform that Bishop Rob was talking about, allowing some beds to lie fallow perhaps for a little while, and then coming back to them. In medieval times there was a system of allowing some ground to lie fallow, something we seem sometimes to have lost in our own day, but very important principle. Letting some parts run wild, wilding, a very interesting process that's going on in some parts of the country, a bit controversial, But we can't control everything that happens, and sometimes God springs things up that we hadn't even anticipated. Pruning, some things we have to stop, perhaps, doing in order to enable other things to grow, and even death. Because in a garden, everything has a lifespan. Some things die. They have to be removed in order to create space for new things to be planted and to grow. And of course, dead plant matter is quite important, as we know from our compost bins, which are enormous. And the compost enables everything else to grow up, and so on and so on. I mean, one could go on with this analogy for ages, but together, the whole thing becomes the church. And the term used to describe this in the Church of England now is mixed ecology, describing the church of the future as a rich landscape of plants that may look very different, but which are all part of the same garden. And different people have different ideas. This relates to the variety of mission communities, what a flourishing church, a rich landscape looks like. And here are one or two thoughts from people around the county. Well, thanks to all those people who fed in their thoughts and reflections, a bit of an illustration of the sort of breadth of the church across the county. And that's the kind of faith landscape that we're looking to see flourish more and more, so that people can be transformed by the gospel. And part of our hope is that, part of our conviction, is that the gospel still has the same power to transform people's lives as it has had for 2,000 years. And it goes on transforming and changing people's lives. That's what we are all about. That's what the Refreshed God for All vision is about. And despite all the variety and all the different strands that feed into it, there is right at its core this fundamental faith in Jesus, belief in Jesus, risen and ascended, and our conviction that the future lies in more and more people discovering his love for them and his purpose for their lives. So that's our refreshed God for All vision with the strategies that accompany it. We've overshot slightly, but I think we were almost within our hour.
Thank you very much.
Have we got time for questions?
I think we have, yeah. Just a few questions. We are going to probably run a little bit later on lunch, but that's okay. So we start with Carl.
Yeah,
have we got a mic? Just hold on 1 second.
It's
behind you. It's Panto season already.
Yeah, Carl Carter, Furness Deanery. I think it's true to say that as a deanery and mission community, we're still at a very early stage in that process. Unless I misheard, Bishop Rob made a very bold statement. He said, we know where God is going. I don't know where God's going, and it's one of the things I continually pray for discernment, of understanding of the will and direction. If you've got an inside line, tell us where we're going, and we can get there.
I'd say I'm talking about Revelation. I think what I'm saying, Carl, is that we know that God's purpose is to redeem all things and gather all things to himself. And so, in a sense, in the great sweep of salvation history, that's what we're working towards. And so we are looking in all the places we are to bring something of the hope and healing of Jesus Christ. We're heading for that direction. If we were heading for a different direction, then we'll miss that target. Well, God won't miss that target, but we won't be part of it. So that's what I mean by it.
Can we pass the mic along? Thank you.
Glyn Jones. Albeit probably 4 or 5 years ago now, there was some academic research about how mission communities impact upon chaplains and chaplaincies. It was across the board. It was all the partners, many of our companions, over 100 chaplains were involved. One of the things that emerged, it was only one of the things, was some kind of discord in the central harmony. At that time, there was deep suspicion about ecumenism. And my question is now, 4 or 5 years down the line, what's your assessment of it? Have we together fully embraced ecumenism, or is it still, on some level, the elephant in the room?
Thank you very much, Glyn. Well, two things there, really. First of all, about chaplaincy. We didn't specifically mention chaplaincy in this, but it is a very important part of everything we're doing, so I'm grateful to you for mentioning that. And you'll find an excellent article on chaplaincy in this week's Church Times, just to publicise that. With regard to ecumenism, well, it is patchy. Yeah, it is patchy across the county. In some places, it's taken for granted. It is going like a bomb, and people are really benefiting from working together and enjoying working together and discovering a huge amount of mutual support and encouragement from it. In other places, there is deep suspicion of working together for a whole variety of different reasons, which I can understand. I've been involved in the ecumenical movement for many, many years. But we are deliberately and unashamedly ecumenical in this county and will continue to be so, and are hoping to encourage everybody to work more closely with their Christian brothers and sisters if they possibly can. If they, for all sorts of theological and practical reasons, find that that isn't possible, okay, but please do it if you possibly can. And certainly in a chaplaincy context, the work is ecumenical anyway.
Thank you. Question over here. Can you just hang on for the mic?
Hi, I'm Jan Collins Webb from Those Waters, St Bartholomew's. I'm extremely encouraged by the wonderful pamphlet that has been given, because it outlines everything, and from a layperson you can actually pass it out to the congregation, and they can understand what you're talking about, because there's long been a time when they say, well, what do you do at Diocesan Synod? What's it all about? And that, in a nutshell, is it, and it's fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you to Dave, our communications officer, who produced that.
Are there any more questions? I'm sure this conversation will run and run. Thank you both very much. I'm now going to invite Cameron to come and talk about the Archdeacon's review. Are you all right keeping it to about 20 minutes, Cameron? Is that okay?
Excellent. The Archdeaconry review is part of a process. So really what I'm doing today is presenting it to you, and ongoing from this will be the opportunity for everybody here, if you wish to feed into the review process and to have your say, and this will take place over the next 6 months. So if we can have the first slide. So what is this review process? Those of you who are members of the Diocesan Synod in 2020 will remember the task group reporting and the recommendation of the task group put simply that the 5 senior clerical roles in the diocese, 2 bishops, 3 archdeacons, the next time there was a vacancy, looked to that being slimmed down to 4 senior roles. And that was agreed by this synod, can't be unagreed without another motion and debate, so that is what we are committed to as a diocese. What we didn't do then, and I include we because I was part of that as well, we didn't have any roadmap or any plan for what that would look like next time there was a vacancy. And so the next vacancy that came was at the end of May 2021, when Bishop Emma moved on to her new role. And then we had the debate about, well, This is the first vacancy, so should the diocese have a Bishop of Penrith, there's considerable debate in the Bishops' Council and Synod. Bishop James consulted the Diocese Commission, which he was required to do, and got very clear steer and answer from them. Yes, there should be, and can you get on with it and do it as quickly as possible? Same time, there have been a review commission by Stephen Linus, who very experienced in the church, and gave us a very helpful report that we looked at in the Bishops' Council and in Synod. The Synod and Council approved the Bishop's desire to appoint a new Bishop of Penrith, and hey presto, we have a new Bishop of Penrith. That doesn't answer the task group's question. How do you get moved from 5 to 4? And that's what this Archdeaconries review report is all about. It's 24 pages, contains so much information. There were questions asked at the Synod, questions asked at the Bishops' Council. The information requested is all in this report. And you might say, well, why haven't we got a copy of it yet? Because today we're presenting it. Later on this week, you will be invited to go on the Diocesan website and read it for yourself. And you'll be invited to send me responses. If you want those responses considered at the Bishops' Council on the 7th of November, you'll have to send them to me by the 31st of October to give me time to collate them and for them to go out in advance for the Bishops' Council. So this is a process. It's not answers today, not proposals today. It's the beginning of a process of consideration. We presently have 3 archdeaconry posts, but at the moment, because of the resignation of the Archdeacon of Carlisle, what we have is 3 people working together to fill 2 archdeaconries posts, with 1 becoming vacant at the beginning of the year. So it is a transitional period and time, and we need to use this time carefully and faithfully to discern the way ahead. Now, understand that it is uncomfortable and difficult for those 3 people taking those 2 archdiaconal roles at the moment to have a conversation about their job and what they should be doing. And I think we need to be sensitive to that, and I also think we need to express our thanks for these 3 people who work very hard on our behalf and are working very hard covering what they're doing. I will take questions at the end. I'm under a time constraint, Charles, for presentation, so you can come back in a minute. So we put this report, presented it on the 7th of September to Bishops' Council, presenting it today, and now we're opening this all up to discussion going forward. The leadership team of the diocese haven't considered this report yet and will be considering it this week and coming back to it again on the 21st of November. There'll be comments and discussions at the Bishops' Council on the 7th of November, and then at the residential in January. That is when we'll move to decisions and planning going forward, and coming back to the Synod here in March with a post-Easter implementation. So that's the process we're involved in. Can we have the next slide, please, James? So what's in this report? Well, you asked, and the Bishops' Council asked for lots of things, and all this information is here in this report. The first 8 pages deal with 7 reviews that have taken place over the last 15 years, and they're summarised for us. But the document itself just has this comment at the end: the constant direction throughout all these reviews was to shape the role around enabling and equipping clergy and churches for mission and growth. That's been the direction of travel over the past 15 years. There's a lot of information about what is the role of an archdeacon, the roles performed. We identified in terms of governance and statutory roles, there are at least 27 different roles that an archdeacon has to perform in some way or delegate to other people. So it is a heavy role, and then if you add growth and you add other parts, then you're making this very demanding on people. Many people have asked about, well, how much do archdeacons cost? Well, that's all in here. So all the costings done. Lots of people have asked, well, what are other dioceses doing? Well, it's a very, very mixed picture. But what we do have is a table showing you what all the other dioceses are doing and how we stand in that table with our 3 current roles and what difference there might be if we moved to 2. But there is a summary of the way in which other dioceses are going. And there are 3 basic principles what dioceses are doing. Archdeaconry posts are used in complementary ways rather than requiring split roles. So, for example, in Worcester, 2 archdeacons cover the whole diocese, one in a traditional role and the other purely in terms of parish development. That is a way in which we could go if you wanted to go that way. Some dioceses have extended their numbers of roles by employing assistant archdeacons. Blackburn has gone down that role to free up the archdeacon to be more creative and to delegate day-to-day tasks. Other dioceses have done that by developing the role of area dean. And I know that when I was an area dean in Oxford Diocese, 33 deaneries and all the area deans undertook the visitations. The archdeacons didn't do those. So there's lots of different patterns, more radical ways of doing things. An archdeacon's post has been removed from a diocese to enable the appointment of a specialist development post or a support of deaneries, rural deans and area deans. So the world's your oyster, really, about how you want your archdeacons to work. There's in here a summary of conversations, of different viewpoints on the role of archdeacons. There's the review of the work of the SDOs, which leads us to a series of options. Now, these options are not exclusive. They're just 5 options to suggest a diversity of response. We could move to a situation where we just have 2 archdeacons looking after 2 archdeaconries. We could have 2 archdeacons working across the whole county, 1 pastoral and 1 statutory, like Worcester. We could have 1 archdeacon just doing the things that archdeacons do, but with a whole team of people. We could have 3 archdeacons in 3 each archdeaconries, but with each archdeacon being involved in a parish in some way. Or we could have 2 archdeacons covering all 3 archdeaconries. The possibilities are endless. The question, and this is what we're coming on to, so if you can just click the next slide, James, thank you. What do you want the archdeacon to do? That's the question, because there are lots and lots of possibility. And if the numbers of archdeaconries are reduced from 3 to 2, or even 3 to 1, what changes are needed to support that structure? And crucially, how do we stop the archdeacons from overworking and becoming overwhelmed? And I guess the answer to 3 is to be very, very clear about number 1. What exactly do we want our archdeacons to do, and how are we going to support them in doing it? So that's a very, very quick summary of what we're going to do. We were going to break down into discussions well, we won't, because I don't want to delay your lunch, and I can see a few hands, people wanting to ask things or say things. So we'll just do that for a few minutes, and then I'll just explain how you're going to be able to respond. Charles, I will unleash you now from your...
Cheers. Thank you. I just wanted to clarify, Cameron, when you said earlier on at the beginning of your presentation, 3 personnel, what we've got to remember is that whilst there are 3 personnel, there are actually only really 2. And it's probably better to think at the moment of there being 2 archdeacons, because 2 of them are part-time. If you call it 3 archdeacons, people will think they've got 3 full-times at the moment. We don't. We have 2 full-time archdeacon posts. We have 2 full-time archdeacon equivalents at the moment, fulfilling 3 roles, and that's the stretch we've got.
Yes, thank you, Charles. That's what I tried to say, but obviously didn't say it clearly enough. Thank you. Does anybody else want to say anything? Thank you.
I must say that I'm astonished to be asked to discuss a detailed report I haven't had sight of yet, while you're promising it on the website next week. You've cantered through detailed points from it, which we haven't had time to study, and we're going to break to chat about it. Yeah. It's a key point. We need the laity, as well as the Bishop's Council and the leadership team, need to discuss these points in proposal rather than cantering through to something which is down as proposed agreement March Synod, but comments by the end of October.
No, initial comments by the end of October. This is an ongoing conversation. Yes, it is a large report and will be available, but it's an ongoing discussion. The only reason I'm cantering through it is because we don't have much time before lunch, but it's the first step, and all that information will be available to be looked at. If you want to make a response for the 7th of November, then it's a response by the 31st. Of course, you can continue to make a response thereafter. Any more comments or views? Thank you very much then. I don't know whether any of the other members of the review group want to say anything just briefly. Don't have to say anything. No. Thank you very much then, in which case the report will be on the website. There'll be invitation to make responses and comments over the next 3 months, and if you would make them to me, then I can summarise them and put them to Bishop's Council, and we can begin the discussion. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, we're going to move into lunch now. If I can ask you please to come back at 25 to 1, 2. Just checking you're still awake and alert. Shall we just bow our heads and say grace? Loving God, we thank you for all that we've discussed, for all that we've been thinking about. We pray that in our conversations and our fellowship over lunch, that we might continue both to think about the things that we've done, to talk about them, but also to come together in fellowship. We thank you for the food that we've brought, and that it might strengthen us for the work that you've given us to do. In Jesus' name, amen.
What a happy crowd. Why are you so happy? If you look at your agenda closely, and I only did about half an hour ago, this meeting should have started at 10:30, so you're 3 hours behind. Obviously nobody else noticed either. There we are. So this is a meeting of the Diocesan Board of Finance. Andrew Norman could come in, please. Andrew Norman, you are called. There's always one. Right. The happy subject of finance. We heard all about what is going to happen with what we spend our money on this morning. Now this is to talk about where it's hopefully going to come from. It says Chair's remarks. Very briefly, I just want to let you know how things are going this year. Our financial year ends in December. So far, we're pretty much on budgeted track. We've budgeted to be within 20k of break-even, and Rick assures me that the omens are favourable, so it'll be virtually break-even year, which in the current circumstances is extremely good. You know what's happening out there, not just in the diocese, but in the world economically. So I don't need to go through all the things that are troubling us. But there are a number of pluses. Parish offer is holding up very well, so thank you very much. It might show a sign of resilience, might show growth, or it might just show a depletion of reserves in the hope of things better to come. But for whatever reason, you are paying your money into the central treasury, which means we can meet the obligations that you approved a budget for. And so all's well so far this year, and only 2.5 months to go. So we're continuing to try and rationalise our balance sheet by getting stuff which isn't yielding much away and putting it into things that are going to yield more, which goes to support ministry in terms of extra investment income. In the current climate, you might think that's a difficult ask. I think it probably is going to become more and more difficult, but nevertheless, in the budget discussions which we're going to have later in the meeting, that is a factor which we've built in, perhaps optimistically, that we're going to continue to reap benefits from, because we do need to do that to support ministry in the areas where they're just actually totally unable to support the ministry costs themselves, but ministry has to be there. Of course it does. On the edges, which we've talked about this morning in terms of outreach, rather than hoping people will come, two major elements we have in the diocese: Rydal Hall, continuing under difficult circumstances as the whole trade is experiencing, continuing to trade well, occupancy levels surprisingly good, but the costs of energy, because there hasn't been much rain in the lakes, although recently that's rectifying itself, we're having to buy electricity at the variable rate from the national grid. And if you were to speak to Rick about that, because he's on the Rydal board and he does the accounts, that's having a major impact on the bottom line of Rydal Hall, as of course our staffing costs, but that's across the trade. We didn't expect it, but it's happening. But nevertheless, Rydal Hall is a committed outreach element of our diocesan strategy, and it will continue to be so. And if it doesn't actually make a profit, well, that's not its prime purpose. Its prime purpose is to outreach and to reach people who wouldn't otherwise tread within the walls of a church, to make a contact in some way or another with faith and experience those who have one. And on the Restore, our charity shops, which are so much more than that. They're another outreach opportunity. The Penrith shop, since we last met, opened and doing extremely well. Big footfall going through next to Sainsbury's in Penrith. And an opportunity to engage with people who are having struggles in their lives and to perhaps do more private discussions about how life could improve for them, point them to areas where they could receive more care, more support, and that's happening throughout the chain, Carlisle and Penrith, and who knows, maybe we'll be able to expand that into other areas of the diocese as the ability to manage it grows. We've got Rob Cook in our midst here today. He's a trustee of Restore, and he does time in the he serves in the in the Petrol Bank Road shop in Harrowby, and he's also taken on the job of keeping their accounts, all voluntary, all unpaid. Thank you very much, Rob. So lots of volunteers, and I think Neil Barrett is deep into the Penrith shop as well, perhaps Julie too, I don't know. But there are stories that can be told about the Restore initiative by people in this room, so many thanks for everybody's input who is involved. So the diocese is ticking away, firing on most of its cylinders, and well done and thank you to everybody who should get a credit for that. That's really all I want to say about this year. You've got some formalities here. You've got the minutes of the last meeting that we held in Synod on Tuesday the 14th of June to approve as a factually correct record. Do I have your approval that these are a factually correct record? Thank you very much. And are there any matters arising which people would like to raise from that? If not, we'll pass forward and ask you to receive the minutes of the trustees of the Board of Finance meetings, which were held on the 18th of May and on the 13th of July. As you can see, they're a comprehensive summary of all the business that we handle in the diocese. We don't obviously touch on spiritual and ministry matters too much, but we try and become aware of the impact of those issues on what might be needing funding and whether we're going to have enough funds to meet those obligations. So there is an interlink, but our job very much is to handle the material side of things. Those are our minutes, and they have been approved by the DBF, so we ask you to receive those. Do you receive them? Thank you very much. And now on to the main item on the agenda. A preface from me, but nothing else. Derek and Rick have put a lot of time with many others into consulting and then preparing and then reporting to Bishop's Council and now coming to you with a proposal for the 5 years to 2027. Trying to see into the future is difficult at the best of times, which is why we didn't do it last year. We had a 1 year carryover because of COVID and various uncertainties. And we thought perhaps that by this time things would be more settled. Could we have been more wrong? And trying to construct budgets for growth perhaps is the wrong phrase to use in the current political circumstances. But hopefully our team will still be in place by the end of the meeting. And so without further ado, and trying to look forward with some degree of rationality into the next 5 years and how things might go, with the full knowledge that we're going to have to flex it as we go, because things will never happen exactly as we hope or expect. But it's a roadmap, it's a plan, and as long as we take an adaptable approach to it, then it should stand us in good stead, as did the one for the 5 years leading up to 2020, where the strategy was to break even, and we did more than that. But I don't want to steal Derek and Rick's fire, so I'll hand over to Derek now. Thank you.
Can I just check people can hear me? Can people hear me okay? Yeah, great. Thanks, Jim, for the introduction. I hope it goes without saying, actually, that the reason we have the budget is to resource the mission and ministry of the Church in Cumbria, for no other reason. So it's actually very timely that today we've got this discussion about the budget for the next 5 years at the same time as Bishops James and Rob have set out their vision for the diocese. And it really strikes me that what we heard from James and Rob about a common theme of hope and realism, that pervades both the vision and strategy, but it's also written through what I'm going to say about the budget. And I'm really conscious about loads of metaphors and analogies at the moment, but hope and realism run through what I'm going to say about the budget like they run through a stick of Blackpool Rock, which is my hometown. But to add another analogy, Rick and I like to think that the budget is a bit like, setting the budget is a bit like baking a cake. So if we look at it that way, the starting point, I think, is what are the ingredients of the cake? And the first thing is the vision and what we're trying to achieve. Then there's the context in which we're trying to set the budget. There are our financial principles that help us get a sense of what guides us with the budget, not where we're trying to get to, but how we go about it. There's a set of ingredients which are our priorities, and there's a set of ingredients which relate to the fact that we're always scanning what's going on with an eye for changing demands and developments in the world around us. So I'm going to think about each of those in turn before I get on to the real nub of the budget. But I think it's important you understand we sort of work through some of those ingredients. So the first one, that question of what do we want to achieve? And obviously overall, it's about the vision and strategy. But if we take that down to a little bit more detail, I see it being very much as wanting to continue to invest in local ministry, in mission communities, with a diverse model of ministry, and with investment in less affluent parts of the county, investment in revitalising churches that are struggling, investment in planting new churches, and investment in expanding the network youth church. So it's across the whole of the board. So that's the first bit of what we're trying to achieve. The second is, if we have this strategy, God for All, if we have within that a set of things we want to do, and if we're really committed to mission communities as part of that, then the budget has to try to deliver on supporting mission communities to become really effective and established, to grow our ministry, and to help us grow younger. So that's the second chunk of stuff the budget's there to achieve. And the third, what we're trying to achieve, is actually we want to do all this in a way which means the diocese is in as good a financial position on the 31st of December 2027 as it is on the 1st of January 2023, because we're looking to set a budget for 5 years. The second ingredient that I mentioned was the context, and nobody needs me to tell them that the context is really difficult. There's lots of aspects of that. We've got economic uncertainty, domestically and internationally. We've got high and unpredictable inflation. We've got a 10-year trend in parish offer, which has been, until the last year, almost all in one direction. So we've had a 40% real terms fall in the parish offer over a decade. And then if that wasn't bad enough, we are trying to cope in this budget period with the hangover from COVID, which resulted in a further 12% fall in cash terms in the parish offer, and resulted in 2020 in us taking a number of steps to save money in the short term, some of which are just coming back to nibble us on the posterior for the medium term. And then the context also, the church context, the global context, but particularly for us, given our commitments as the Church of England, we've got the carbon neutral agenda. So we're committed to trying to be carbon neutral by 2030. So if our budget is for the period 23 to 27, it takes us a long way towards that 2030 point. And the reality is, all those things make budgeting really difficult. And Jim and I actually had a conversation as to whether it was worth trying to set a budget for 5 years. And we decided, no matter what we did, the numbers over the 5 years will turn out to be wrong. But if we don't set a budget, how do we know where we're trying to get to and how we're sort of guiding things through? So I view this very much as taking the good ship HMS Carlisle on a 5 or 10 year voyage of discovery across the ocean, and the job of the budget is to try to keep the ship sailing in broadly the right direction, but accepting that from time to time we'll be buffeted one way and another. But as long as we're sort of heading that way and we get towards where we want to be over the 5 years, then the budget will have done its job. The third ingredient is the principles that underpin the budget, and you're probably familiar with these because we've been hammering away at them probably for 15 years. And the first one is we try to balance the budget over the budget cycle. So we don't sell assets in order to fund current expenditure. If we sell assets, we invest the receipts, we get a return off that, which we get in perpetuity, we hope, which then can be invested in the work of the church. And we don't borrow for current expenditure, so that's another principle. We try to maintain the value of the stipend against inflation, because the stipend is supposed to be set at a level which enables our clergy to get on with their ministry, and we think that that level is that level. So if inflation is whatever, then we should try to match that. And then a principle that we've sort of moved increasingly towards in the last couple of years is to try to stop thinking about the money that the DBF puts into the pot or the church commissioners put into the pot. Stop thinking about that as just being there to close the gap between what we want to spend and what the local church can contribute. We want to see that more as money which we can invest in the mission of the church. And in one sense, that's sort of common sense. But in another sense, I think that changes the way you start to think about things. And then the last principle at the moment is, if we want to do new stuff, we struggle to get the money out of the general budget. So as a principle, we're working on the basis for this budget. If we want to do new things, if we want new initiatives, if we want to plant new churches, we will have to go outside the DBF for funding, and that includes particularly going to the church commissioners, who've announced a third more money for the next 3 years than the previous 3 years in terms of what's available to dioceses. Quite a lot of conditions on what you can spend that money on, but we'll be going to them expecting our share of the pot in order to fund new initiatives. Actually, funnily enough, I'm just going to do a little aside, if that's okay, because I want to just reinforce something that Jim said that amused me. When I was writing my speaking notes for today, I was struck with the parallels with the government's plight, and I couldn't resist this, because I'm not a comedian, but every comedian must be having a field day. So, like them, we know that growth is the real answer to our problems, don't we? But unlike them, we know there's no short-term, quick fix, easy answers to achieving growth. Like the government, we've got options. We can raise taxes or cut taxes, if that's how you look upon the parish offer, or we can increase expenditure or cut spending, so raising taxes and cutting spending. Unlike the government, we won't borrow to fund current expenditure, but we will look for external support for measures to grow in the future. And unlike them, we're not looking for a fifth Chancellor in 5 years, or I hope not, anyway. The final ingredient in the mix in the budget are our assumptions about what's going to happen and developments that we want to support. So if you've read the paper, which I'm sure you have, there's a lot of information in the appendix to the paper about assumptions and developments. So there are some major developments. One is about financing the carbon neutral work, particularly in respect to parsonage houses. One is about, believe it or not, and I don't know whether this will be the case over the coming 3 years, given the uncertainty, the contribution rate on the clergy pension fund that dioceses have to pay is coming down quite significantly because the deficit on the fund has finally been largely cleared, so our contribution rate should come down. What the current turmoil actually means for that, I really don't know, but we're working on the basis that'll work through. And then we've got some developments that come from the work around the vision and strategy that Bishop Rob was talking about. So there's some things in there that'll affect the budget, and then we've got some assumptions that we plug into the budget about what will happen to parish offer, the number of clergy and other local ministry posts we'll be funding, the rate of inflation, the fact that new work will be externally funded, and the fact that where we've got existing initiatives being funded externally, they will have to transition over time to being sustainable in their own right. So if we put all those things together, the assumptions and developments, the context, the principles, what we're trying to achieve, and we sort of stick them all in the mixing bowl and we bake the cake, we see what comes out is not very attractive or appealing, because it shows on that set of bases a substantial loss each year of the budget period, and a loss that gets bigger each year. So it reaches 2027 with a £600,000 deficit and cumulatively a deficit of 1.9 million across the 5 years. So when we saw that come out of the oven, our immediate reaction was, that's no good. We need a better cake. So as part of trying to handle that, Rick and I said, why is that the case? What are the real underlying factors that are causing this situation? And one is, in the early years of the budget period, we're expecting high inflation, and we're not expecting our income to rise in line with inflation. So there's an issue there. Not a lot we can do about that in terms of affecting the inflation rate. The second thing is parish offer and parochial fees our initial assumption is they'll fall by 2% in cash terms year on year, because that's what's been happening up until this year. And the third negative factor is this hangover from COVID, which we're still experiencing. And those are offset in that 1.9 million deficit scenario by some continued, what I would call marginal reductions in clergy numbers, and some increased investment income. Because as we dispose of assets and we invest the capital receipt, then our investment income increases, and that's been happening for a decade and a half. But understanding the factors doesn't actually stop it being an unacceptable outturn. So we then thought, okay, what do we do next? And common sense, I think, says you can mitigate that by reducing costs, or you can mitigate it by increasing your income, if we're not going to borrow, which we're not. If we want to reduce our costs to the tune of 1.9 million across 5 years, then the only area we feel you could make substantial cuts would be in local ministry. And that is clearly completely inconsistent with our current strategy, which is of having mission communities appropriately staffed with stipendiary clergy in leadership roles and supported by other paid and unpaid ministers and network youth church, etc. So we really don't want to go down that avenue. We could also potentially cut more of the centre, so roles like mine. In 2020, as part of the response to COVID, I think people will remember that we cut pretty deep into the centre. The bits of expenditure which we identified at the core, which I'd say were completely discretionary, are stewardship support, and cutting that doesn't seem to me like the brightest thing to do when you're trying to increase your income, or communications. And to be honest, the idea of running an £8 million a year charity and the diocese that sits above it without a professional communication function in the 21st century, it doesn't seem to me like that's really discretionary expenditure. So I don't think there's scope for significant additional cuts in central costs. There's some things we can do, and we'll look at them. One of the things we're looking at is whether we stay in church house or whether we go to an entirely home-based working approach and sell the building. That's the sort of thing that we're considering. But even things like that aren't going to make the big difference to the bottom line. So what we've spent most of our time looking at then, and this comes to the nub of this budget, is there scope to revisit the local church's contribution to the income of the diocese? And it's still the case that 60% of our budget comes from the parish offer and parochial fees. So that's fundamental to the budget. And the nub of this, and this is really important, is that the contribution from the local church has fallen, not from every local church, but overall has fallen by 40% in real terms in a decade. If the local church can't shoulder as much of the burden over the next 5 years as it has done over the last 5 years, so I'm not saying in real terms give lots more, but if it can't do what it's done over the last 5 years, then I think actually the game is up for the current model of church in the county. And I say that on the back of 18 years' experience of, if I look at it biblically, trading our 5 talents, because I think we've done a pretty good job on that, or if I look at it a different way, we've taken slices off the stipendiary salami every year, slice, slice, slice. And I don't think there's scope to do much more of that, either pulling more rabbits out of hats or taking slices off the stipendiary numbers. So this is a real big deal. Now, Rick and I have sat down and we've done our work on the parish offer or mission community offer and asked the question, could the parish offer rise by the same rate as stipends from 2024 to 2027, which we think would be 3% in the first year and 2% each year afterwards. Now, you'll see in the papers it talks about this in paragraph 5.9 and says this would be noteworthy. And I think that's an understatement. It would be noteworthy. It'd be more than noteworthy. It's not something that would just happen by itself. It would need to be a focus of our, if you like, our managerial attention. It would need a lot of action. It would need a lot of local dialogue. In the words of the Prime Minister, it might mean taking some tough decisions. The reason why I think this is possible is because this year, for 2023, the parish offer has gone up by 2.5% in spite of everything that's going on. And I think that's a remarkable achievement. And I think, I've written down here, plus, thank you to say, because that has changed a trend of 10 years. Maybe it's only for a year, who knows? We'll come on to that. But to me, that says, if you engage in dialogue with people locally, they understand the issue, they really want to do something about it, you can effect some change. And that's the second reason why I think this is possible. The places where we've invested the most time in the conversations we have had with some of you in rooms with an archdeacon and people from the finance team and people from the mission community, and really explained the context and really tried to sort of come together with a commitment to the diocese providing the ministry in response to the local church providing the money. Those are the places we've invested most time, where we've seen the most result in the places we've invested the most time. So we think that if we can invest in that and collectively come together, we can shift the trend. The negatives, so the reasons why I might not believe this is possible, is because over 10 years the trend is strongly in the wrong direction. I think there's some interesting psychology about how the parish offer works, which has not helped us around that, but there's a 10-year trend. There's inflation, which is upsetting us all, isn't it? Higher energy bills, particularly for parishes. And it's probably true to say that the mission communities where we've had the most dialogue in the last year or two have been the ones that are best developed and most up for the conversation. And the ones that are least developed and less up for the conversation are probably the ones where it'll be harder to effect a change. So I'm not saying this sort of in a rose-tinted way that, oh yes, we'll easily be able to do this. But we've spent quite a lot of time talking to members of Bishop's Council and the DBF trustees, and also I've talked to quite a lot of people in local churches, including lay chairs and rural deans in some deaneries. And on balance, I think, that by the grace of God, and with a lot of hard work, and with the following wind, we could achieve that increase for a few years. I wouldn't like to say beyond that, but I think we can for a few years. And effectively what I'm saying to you is, if we can squeeze some more money out of the system until, say, 2025, if we believe in our vision and strategy and believe in mission communities and believe in the work that Bishop Rob's going to lead on church planting and revitalisation, and believe that Network Youth Church is going to have an impact, and believe that the growing younger work is going to make a difference, then we should start to see some results coming through towards the end of the budget period. So on that optimistic note, Rick and I ran the model again, saying, if we got 3% more in parish offer in 2024 and 2% more in each of the 3 years after that, so not 2023 where we're going to take a hit because of inflation, but once things are settled down a bit, the end result of that is a loss in 2023, but by 2027 the budget's back slightly better than in balance. And there's a cumulative deficit over the 5 years of about 420,000 quid, which is 1% of our overall turnover. Now that's clearly a much better outturn than the one I described earlier of the £1.9 million loss. It's still a £420,000 deficit. And we have this principle of balancing the budget over the cycle. And I've, probably more than anyone else, I've hammered away at that over the last 15 years, which I think is one of the reasons why, although our financial position isn't good, it's better than many dioceses. We're not losing money year on year, and we're not having to sell houses to balance the budget. So that principle is really dear to me, and I would only divert from it, and I think the trustees are really committed to it, would only divert from it if there was a really good reason to do so. If you look at the situation, as Jim alluded to, over the previous 5-year budget period, we made an undesignated surplus, or we've made an undesignated surplus since 2015 of a bit over 500,000 quid. and it's over 15 years since we've sold assets to fund our ongoing costs. So we think the last 5 years give us some sense that if we say we're going to do something, we can do it, and also have generated this cash surplus which we could use over the next 5 years to fund this deficit of 420,000 that I'm talking about. And I think in terms of our principles then, you can say there's a case for drawing on that cash, which is reasonable and prudent, and actually can go further, and I know this is something that Jim really believes in. If we commit that money to the next 5 years to make the budget work, to help make our strategy work, then what it's actually doing is honouring, if you like, the covenant between the Board of Finance and the local church. Because it's individuals and local churches that have given the money that hasn't been spent that's resulted in that surplus. So it's only reasonable for that money to be reinvested in local ministry over the next 5 years. If we haven't spent all the money that's been given to the DBF, then we should feed it back in. So that's what's being proposed in this budget. Now, obviously, we wouldn't wait until 2027 to see if it worked or not, because we might find we've got a big problem sort of emerging over the years, but we would set off in that direction with a view every year, as we do, to reviewing how things are going, and if necessary, being prudent, we'd have to make changes as we go along. And in any case, by 2027 things will be different again, so we can't really predict where we'd end up. So my conclusion on the budget is what we've set out in the paper and what I've said today is the only approach we think is consistent with implementing the vision and strategy while also sticking to our budget principles. The alternative to this, we think, is substantial further cost cutting, which risks losing the critical mass that we need in order to implement the vision and strategy, especially in terms of ministry in mission communities. It's high risk because we're asking the local church to do something it hasn't done for the last 10 years. And we shouldn't agree the budget if we think it's too high a risk. But if we don't go with this, then I think we're getting ahead of ourselves in saying the vision strategy is not going to work. So we need to give it the chance of working, and this is a way of trying to do that. So the DBF trustees, the DBF, is proposing this to you as the budget on the basis for 2023 to 2027 that there's a plan which is ambitious but still prudent and is hopeful but still realistic.
Go on, give him a clap. I hope the last, however long it was, quarter of an hour, have demonstrated yet again that Derek is not just a superb administrator, but he's actually very good as a public speaker. And I'm immensely grateful to have him as effectively our administrative chief executive, and backed up by Rick and the people that support Rick in Church House. Great team. I keep on saying it, but don't get bored with it because it's true. So the question is, you've heard the exposition, the rationality, you've seen the figures, hopefully read them, hopefully they haven't kept you awake at night. But if you don't agree this format of figures, there'll have to be something better taking its place. And I think, as Derek's just said, I'm not sure what that would be, because it's closely tied to delivery of the mission of the diocese in the format that's been explained very well this morning. One goes with the other. So, do you approve the budget for the years 2023 to 2027 as written in the documents which you have had? All those in favour? Anybody against? Thereby avoiding the risk of having to come up here and say what it would have been instead. That's very, very good. Thank you very much for your support. And that ends the DBF meeting, unless there are questions of a general nature. There is one question.
I assume that a summary of
Derek, I think you might be involved in the roadshows. I don't think I will be. So what would you think?
Do you mean in terms of presentation?
Yes.
Or do you mean something on a...
The presentation to the people there, so they can understand why they've been asked. Often they don't know.
Right. It's not built into the programme as it stands, so perhaps getting to Rob and I should have a conversation.
But I think there is a way around this, because it would make, I mean, you saw the roadshow this morning, it ran on 20 minutes longer than had been scheduled, for good reasons, there's a lot in there. To make it even longer would probably lose people's attention, but, as Derek said, there have been, and this has produced an increase in offerings for 2023, there have been discussions with some elements of the diocese which have produced results along the lines of a succinct exposition of the circumstances in which we find ourselves and an encouragement to sign up to supporting them. And if those discussions do continue, and they will, because the more that they take place, the more product we see coming out in terms of positivity, then perhaps that's the way to do it. Because we've got the Treasurers' roadshows coming up, Pie and Peace suppers, where Sophie and Rick are going round deaneries and doing their thing just like they did before COVID. Those are the elements that will be built into those sessions. I'm sure Rick wants to put his hand, wants to say something, yes.
Yeah, just thinking, can we have a mic?
Mike, come up here.
Just thinking on my feet, the synod is being recorded, so whether we want to take the extract of that presentation and actually signpost that and really encourage our clergy, our PCCs, and indeed our church congregations to see that, even if they don't want to watch the whole of synod, maybe that's something that we could really encourage them to see. That's perhaps more realistic.
Which I think brings us to something which instinctively some of us, older ones, me included perhaps, don't automatically do. And Cameron alluded to it with the Archdeacon's Review. More and more communications take place digitally, and it's up to us and then to encourage others to use that format where they possibly can, because otherwise how do we spread the message effectively? But a very good question, thank you. Are there any other points coming up? Chris?
Just a very brief one. If from the floor I could add a word about the amazing job I think that Derek and Rick have done, and the clarity also of the exposition. I think it's an amazing job.
Thanks. How to make a boring, dry subject interesting. It's a challenge. Oh, yeah, hey, musical accompaniment too. Any more points that people... Julie?
Just a really quick question. On the housing expenditure, there's obviously a huge uplift for net zero. Is that enough? It's about 250,000. No.
We don't know. We don't know, but you have to take a measured view on these things. We're making assumptions that we will have to spend a lot of money on our properties, not just churches, but parsonages, which are our responsibility. Churches, it could be argued, are the parish's responsibility, but I'm sure that in among there'll have to be some sort of support. We have yet to see clear signals from the church commissioners as to what, if anything, they're going to be putting into the pot, but there'll have to be a significant element of funding. And we are also possibly waiting to see if there might be a dilution of the ambition of getting to carbon neutral by 2030, because although the vote was taken, I don't think the consequences, particularly for the church and its buildings, were taken into account fully. So there's a settling period. So we've put what we've put away as a significant token acknowledgement of that risk and that liability coming up, in the hope that some of it may not be needed, but probably as expecting us to need more. A hand. I don't recognise.
Hi, my name's Mike from St Thomas Kendal. I'm on our finance committee, and I'm just aware that with inflation being what it is, the stipend for clergy, of which I'm not a member, is well below inflation. Is anyone looked into some kind of subsidiary extra look at that before next year? Because everyone's bills are going up.
The considerations that took place, which Derek could probably enhance if he wishes to, are that when the papers were being drawn up, it was anticipated there would be a large spike in inflation, which would be mitigated by support, which we've seen some of from national government, and perhaps a settling of energy prices. Maybe as time evolves, that'll prove to be wrong, but you have to be prudent. And if Derek wants to add anything to that, the rate that we fixed on was something we thought would probably stand the test of time, rather than reacting or overreacting to immediately current circumstances.
Okay, just briefly, I mean, one is we're working with the Bank of England's aggregation of forecasts for inflation. Now, as an economist, I'm really amused by the fact that all forecasts always end up at 2% inflation, because that's what the Bank of England's mandate is, isn't it? So in the long term, inflation should be running at 2%, but as John Maynard Keynes says, in the long term, we're all dead. We're in the current context, it's impossible to forecast. We're doing our best job on looking at the sort of forecast aggregates that we've got. We've got an anticipated stipend increase for next year, which is built into the budget, of 5.5%, which should, by the time that gets paid, actually be an above inflation increase, if you believe the forecast of inflation. So that should provide an element of catch-up. In 2022, the Church Commission has made available a pot of money to dioceses for clergy who are experiencing hardship because of rising cost of living, particularly energy costs, and quite a substantial amount of that has been allocated out. And our approach, and we actually had an interim stipend increase in year to make some difference to the totals. But our approach, while it's difficult to plan, is to say, on a case-by-case basis, there's financial support available. This is going a bit all over the place, but earlier this week, the Church Commission announced a £15 million support scheme for dioceses, principally for the benefit of local churches, but also for the benefit of clergy experiencing hardship because of energy price rises, which is going to come out to us before Christmas, and we will top slice an element of that for further support for clergy in those circumstances where they need the help. So many clergy have said they don't think they should take the support that's available because they maybe have a household with another substantial income, or they may have private means or whatever. So there's the approach is more targeted support for the people who need it while the situation settles down, and also a need for us to actually model the impact of what the government has done with energy bills in order to work out what the, if you like, the underlying rate of inflation for clergy is, to see if the stipend matches that. And that's quite difficult to do because, again, measures have only been announced recently, etc. So like a combination of targeted support, an above inflation increase next year, and some maths to try to work out whether what we've done so far this year is fair and reasonable, is probably the combination of things that we're doing. So, okay.
As you can see, there are very few simple answers. That's not meant as a joke, it's just reality. These are the circumstances in which we're living. Are there any other points that people want to raise, noting that we've already approved the budgets? Thank you very much. End of meeting.
I do sometimes think we ought to move the DBF not to the graveyard slot, but thank you both very much. We're going to move on now to our healing ministry, and I'm going to call Dr. Alison Fleetwood to come and present to us. Alison is one of our diocesan healing advisor, as well as working as a GP and in teaching as well, I think, of our Doctors of the Future, which is marvellous.
Good afternoon. Ooh. Get used to it. Okay, so thank you for inviting me. I've been asked to share something about healing ministry over the next 45 minutes. So first of all, just as we start, I think when I go to churches and chat with folk, I find that healing ministry is a really interesting word, because it means some things to some people and other things to others. So first of all, I do work with medical students. I teach medical students at Lancaster University. I have to warn you, I'm slightly interactive. So here goes. Are you ready? If I say healing ministry, what words can you call out? What words come to mind? Prayer. Jesus. Spirit. Well-being. Wholeness. Listening. Empathy. Miracles. Inner healing. Laying on of hands. Team. Sorry? Was there another one? Recovery. Brilliant. Thank you. Yeah, there are quite a lot of words there, isn't there? And there's quite a lot of common theme in them, but also... Oh, Susie. Abuse in bad hands, that's really important as well, isn't it, to be aware of, which is one of the reasons that we need healing ministry to be done in a really good and healthy and safe way. Thank you, Susie. So, next question. I'd like you to chat with your neighbour about what is happening in healing ministry where you are, or another question. Ooh. Gosh, that was a long way through a door at the back, wasn't it? What is happening in the healing ministry where you are? Or what would you like to see happen in healing ministry where you are? So what sort of things might be? Okay, so chat together for a few minutes and then we'll have a roaming mic. Okay, so I think we have a roaming mic. So it was obviously generated quite a lot of discussion. Has anyone got anything they would like to share about how they see healing ministry, or would like to see healing ministry where they are in their church community, mission community, benefice, and so on? So, thank you.
I've just been on a bereavement counselling course at St Thomas's at Kendal, and it was brilliant because I went on it to see how other people cope with it, to maybe help me understand how I cope.
Yeah, brilliant.
And
Thank
so,
you.
Yeah, we finished actually on Thursday night was our last
So
session.
the last session was Thursday evening.
Yeah, and but it was absolutely brilliant, and it really helped. All the others said how much it has helped them cope with whatever it is they've been grieving.
Thank you. Thank you for contributing that. And that course was the Bereavement Journey, which has been running at St Thomas's Kendal and also in the Rainbow Parish, and has run by the Methodist Circuit in North Cumbria. There may be other places I don't know of, so please let me know if you're using it as well. And if you would like to be connected into that, it's a lay-run course could be run by, at SDK it was run by Vic the curate, but could be run by a lay person with suitable experience of sessions for folk. And it has a missional angle to it as well, and it invites people, not just folk within the church who've had bereavement, but also open to folk from the community to be welcomed. And of course they then might, start coming to other things in church, and also recognising that loss is not just loss by death, but also loss of job, loss of identity, and so on. Is there anything you want to add to that, George? No. Yeah, so if you want to know about Bereavement Journey, contact me, George, Anne, Yeah. Okay. Anything else?
I imagine that how you deal with healing is how you interpret the word itself.
Indeed.
Whether it's healing in a healing service,
Indeed.
or healing and reconciliation within the community or across a nation, because healing has so many different connotations to it.
Yes,
and how do
indeed.
we focus our limited resources and identifying what healing we need where we are.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's two great points there. One, that it is a very broad word, and in one place might look like a healing service, and in another place there may be healing of relationships, healing of land, healing of all sorts of things going on. But the other thing, which I have just forgotten, you said something else just before the end. What was it? It was, oh well, never mind. It was, can't remember, there was something else. It was about knowing there's so much, knowing what is God calling you in your particular context to do. Because that's across everything, isn't it? There's so much. What is God particularly calling you to in your context? We've got another one. Should we have one more?
Looking on a particularly focused area is development of Anna chaplaincy, which came out of bereavement,
was it the dementia care that came out of?
Dementia care. And we're all getting older, aren't we? But it's how, at the moment, I think that needs to be developed more on an ecumenical basis. And putting my Churches Together hat on, because at the moment, of course, it's very much been developed, an awful lot of it within our Anglican communities, and looking towards their local church to fund them and support them, but not just financially. It'll be the congregations who will actually see what the issues are and what needs to be done. So that's just almost the tip of the iceberg, but certainly I think part of a healing ministry on the whole that we need to be taking forward.
Yes, yes. I think the Anna chaplaincy is a really super model, and giving that spiritual care to older adults, not just in dementia now, but in a wider sense as well. It's a great ministry, isn't it? Okay, so we're going to, I think we could talk for quite a while about healing ministry, couldn't we? But I'll move us on as we're needing to make sure that I keep to time. One thing is, the first person mentioned healing services. We also had miracles, we had inner healing, we had ensuring we don't have abuse. We've got all sorts of things that have been shared so far. And just to say that the healing ministry team has probably got about 10 people in it, a mixture of ordained and lay, and of different breadth of churchmanship. And we do offer a range of training opportunities. So if you would like to have prayer ministry training for your church, your benefice, your mission community, we would be really happy to come and do that with you. And in one church, style of church, it might be laying on of hands, and whilst the band is like making so you can barely hear what the person's saying, and that's what they do, and it's fantastic. And in another church, this may be a very quiet healing service with sacramental healing and kneeling at the rails. So whatever is appropriate for your church context, we would love to do some training and support for that if you would like that. So do get in touch. My email address will be at the end. So we've got a couple of things that we're going to talk about now, which are looking as healing ministry as mission and outreach. So really looking at how we can, through the lens of healing ministry, look at the opportunities for God for all. And the first of those, I think, is ahead of me. Yeah, and the first of those is Renew Wellbeing, which is a national thing. And we have probably about 5 Renew Wellbeing cafes in the diocese now. Is there anyone here who's got a Renew Wellbeing cafe? Yay, yes. So is that up in Brough, or are you part of the Appleby ones and Kirby Stephen ones? Oh, in school, yes, because they have Renew Wellbeing for young families and for youth now, don't they? They've got another. So on their website, there's the general. On their website, there's the general training for adults, which is where they started, but they've now got for children and youth and resources and training for that. That's brilliant, thank you. So Renew Wellbeing is providing a space, often a cafe space, but doesn't have to be a cafe. It may simply be a space where folk can come and where it is okay to not be okay. A place where there is companionship, there's tea, there's coffee, there's sharing of hobbies or doing a jigsaw together, or somewhere I know they go for a walk and then finish at a tea and coffee in the church. It's a place that is great for folk who feel isolated or lonely or have had recent bereavement or who have mental health challenges, or actually anybody. You know, you don't have have a reason to come other than you'd like to. From a church point of view, I've noticed it's a really easy thing to set up, and it doesn't cost a lot of money to run or to set up, which is always a good project, isn't it? So you probably need 2 or 3 hosts, obviously with appropriate training, which the national organisation provide online, and safeguarding and so on, those things. But providing a space where people can come. Now, as well as being present with folk, it also involves an element of prayer. And I think this is one of the things that makes it more than a cafe open to the community. It's one of the things that I found really exciting about it. The Theos think tank report a couple of years showed that for what you might call a social action project, if you see what I mean, run by a church in a community to lead through to growth, people encountering God, going on a journey with God, growing in their faith and leading to church growth. It needs to be connected in to the liturgical heart of the church in some way. So tea and coffee alone does not do it. I mean, tea and coffee is nice, especially if there's cake, but tea, coffee, cake and prayer is even better. But this is interestingly a space which is not specifically a healing service. It's not a space where folk come in and get pounced on with a hand for the miracle that we'd love to see, wouldn't we? But that's not actually the style of what this is about. What this is about is it's topped and tailed with optional prayer time. And that prayer time is led in a quiet space, and it is meditational and contemplative in style. And what we're seeing is this is linking in and connecting into this interest in mindfulness in our communities. You know, sometimes church and prayer is a bit, you know, for some people it's not their thing, but if you give them tea, coffee and some mindfulness, it's amazing, isn't it? It's just terminology, because we would say prayer is very mindful, wouldn't we? So it uses this top and tail of, and again, it's optional, but what tends to happen is that folk come along, so they might use a psalm and just have a verse, one verse, and then a pause, and another verse, and a pause for reflection, or might use a sort of very simple prayer of examine, that kind of thing, giving people space. We find that folk at first kind of watch and then start to say a little word. And we have seen it is coming through. What the Theos think tank said was true, that then folk are then coming and connecting into other things or starting to have faith conversations with the host. But it's all gentle and it's all very optional. So that's Renew Wellbeing. And this one. This one is Healthy Healing Hubs. So Healthy Healing Hubs is a project that's come out of the Guild of Health and St. Raphael, which has it's about 150 years old, I think. It's quite a long-term organisation, isn't it? And in response to COVID, have launched this project called Healthy Healing Hubs. Now, Healthy Healing Hub is an interesting project because it's sort of not a project. You'll see what I mean in a minute. As in, it's not a set, this is what you do. So, whereas with Renew Wellbeing, there's this kind of, this is how it works, although of course it can be adapted for your environment and circumstance in your context, in your people group. With this, it's looser than that. And what it is actually is it is a training and a framework and a support system within which you then have whatever, I mean, a project, or it may not be a project, it might be a program, it might be a rhythm, it might be a way of life. It's whatever it is that supports healing and health and well-being. And the beauty about that is that it can be really contextualised for your people group. Because what we have, you know, if we think about the West Coast and then think about the sheep in the Eden Valley and the cities of Barrow and Carlisle, I suppose Barrow's a town really, isn't it? And the lakes and then all. Do you know what I mean? It's like they're really, really different, aren't they? The context is different, the resources are different. And then when we think about the breadth of churchmanship we have within Anglican breadth, and then adding mission communities and other denominations in. And the beauty about the Healthy Healing Hub is it gives a real breadth within which this can be used across different settings. So what it involves is if a church or a church group benefits mission community would like to explore using this project, we'll chat to you about that. And then the first thing to do is something called the Introduction to Healing Ministry course, and this is run by the Guild nationally on Zoom. There we are talking to Gillian Strain. Do you remember she came to when it was in Workington annual clergy day, didn't she? So some of you will have met Gillian. And we are also working for her to come up to the diocese if we have enough interest to do it for us. But it is already available online. It's 4 times 2 hours, 5 people from each church group. And we have funding for up to 10 churches to go on that. 2 have done it. 2 churches have already done it, and 2 churches are just completing it. In fact, I think last Thursday was. So we're now on 4, and I've got 2 churches who are saying, wanted to go, couldn't do that date. She always alternates the day and time, which is handy. And they're going on in January. So I'm up to 6 now. And I've got there's another place where I was the other day. So I'm up to 7 now. So basically, guys, I've got 3 spaces left. So if you're interested, and we've got funding for it. So what this looks like is Introduction to Healing Ministry course, which is a broad course, as we've described. And then following that, then looking at a good practice charter. Just picking up what Susie shared with us, it is really important that healing ministry is done in a way that is trained, is safe, has good practice, and does not compound abuse. And also, and then there's having got the good practice, which is a good framework, then discerning together what will that look like in your setting? Because it's going to look different in different places. I think I saw Fran. Is Fran here? Yay. So Fran, you're launching on the 6th of November, aren't you? Your Healthy Healing Hub. What's it going to look like? The mic's coming towards it. Sorry, if I'd had a chance to grab you, I'd have warned you. I do apologise.
Do you know, it's interesting. I read something recently that said, if you live in a community that's hungry, evangelism looks a lot like a jam sandwich. And I think what we've realised in some of the communities that we're living and working in is that people are looking for hope and for healing. And I think what we're hoping to provide is a warm, in a cold church, welcoming space, a bit like Renew Wellbeing, but actually healing is going to be front and centre. And we're actually going to promote that as our USP because we believe in it. Yeah. And I think that's what we believe that people are looking for. They're looking for hope and for healing. So the Healthy Healing Hub is the banner under which lots of other things will come. So initially we're going to just create the space, and then we're looking at a 2 or 3 year project where we offer bereavement counselling. I'd love to look at Celebrate Recovery. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of that programme. My sister is the North West rep for Celebrate Recovery. You can check it out online. And that's the 13-step programme for people with hurts, habits and hang-ups. We have a lady in our team who does mental health for people having just had babies, so postnatal stuff. But there's probably lots of other things we can add onto that. But in the first instance, we want to build relationships and get to know the community and what it is that they need from church.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So you can hear that there's so much that can come under that banner of the Healthy Healing Hub, and what might that look like in your place. And the Healthy Healing Hub, the Guild, which is a national, well-recognised, well-reputed guild, will badge the church to help raise confidence once they've gone through this process. And then with that badge, we can approach local providers, such as linking into social prescribers in primary care networks and integrated care communities. And if that all sounds a bit jumbled to you, because it's starting to get a bit NHS and statutory service, it's not a problem, because I'll help you do it, and I know how to find a social prescriber. So it's a lot easier, that bit, than it might feel, because that might be out of your world, but it's in my world. So we can help make those connections up and receive referrals. When I see a patient who's really lonely, sometimes they don't need a tablet. Often they don't need a tablet. But they haven't got anywhere else to go. What they really need is a welcoming community, a warm space, some people to love them and welcome and show them hope and healing and life. And I can then ask our social prescriber to get in touch with them and tell them about what's going on in the community, and linking them into the Renew Wellbeing Cafes and the Healthy Healing Hubs. Whenever we're setting up a new project, I tend to think about role legitimacy, role adequacy, and role support. So with role legitimacy, we're looking at, is there a need for this? And I think, yeah, there is, especially post-COVID. Is there adequacy? Is the training decent? And then role support. And in terms of role support, the Guild has a online community, which is a closed community that folk can share top tips, because this is happening around the country, and also those folk that you met on the online course. There is also a monthly bundle of resources, podcasts. There's training events across the year, and we are hoping to have some hubs. Most hubs will be bronze hubs, but we're hoping to have a couple of gold hubs in the diocese, which will be resource places, resource churches, one in the north, one in the south, different churchmanship, different geography, different healthcare settings, which will have an annual day that Gillian or one of her team will go to. We are also setting up peer support groups, so that those who are the hub leaders will gather together with me or one of my team for peer supervision groups, basically peer support groups, so that we'll be part of a Cumbria community together, sharing top tips, learning from one another, chatting through any issues with one another, supporting one another, in addition to the individual hubs and their individual places. So that's kind of Healthy Healing Hubs. And the last slide that's my email address. So if any of this sounds of interest, and I have 3 funded places left for Healthy Healing Hubs, or you'd like to know about Prime Minister training, Renew Wellbeing, anything else, then please contact this email address. Thank you. Should we do questions now, or with, what do you want to, should I do it now? Okay.
Hi. I'm just thinking really out loud. Are you working alongside Linking Lives? Because we have Linking Lives in Cockermouth and Age UK, and they work together as well. So that's really supportive.
Yeah. Linking Lives. So the question was about, is Linking Lives connected or involved in this? Now, Linking Lives is already happening in Cockermouth, isn't it? And I think over in Appleby area and Penrith, yeah, we've got some bits from Penrith there, are the ones that I'm hearing about. Interestingly, I'm going over to Fran's Place when we're launching the Healthy Healing Hub at St Lawrence's in Appleby at the beginning of November. And I don't know if you know Ashley, and Ashley's going to come to the service. I saw him the other day. And then just, I guess it's up to you guys really. Do you want the Linking Lives project to come under and within the breadth of a Healthy Healing Hub, which you would be very welcome, or do you, are you set up and sorted? And we're very open and welcoming to whatever, but also want to respect that there's plenty of stuff that goes on that's nothing to do with us. We're not trying to take the world over or anything. So whatever works for you. If you want to be linked in, yes. If not, that's completely fine. But we are getting to know the folk like Terry and Ashley, and as Healing Ministry making connection with Linking Lives. Thank you. Pardon? I am really struggling to hear you, I'm sorry.
You haven't got to be totally encompassing each other. You can actually work together. Yeah.
So I think you said you don't have to be, I don't know if you said conflict or in competition with one another. Yeah, but that you can work together. Absolutely. Our desire is to work together whilst also respecting those who, do their own thing and don't want to be part of us. That's totally fine. But as much as possible, we would love to be linked up to whatever's going on. Yeah. Let's all support and encourage one another. Anything else? Stunned silence.
Thank you very much, Alison. Please do utilise Alison and her team if you want any help or support in your healing ministry. Can we thank Alison, and then we're going to invite
Ali. Brief word from me too, to add to those thanks to Alison. You'll have heard a bit about the extraordinary scope of healing ministry across Cumbria. Last week we had a meeting in my house looking at healing ministry, and Alison had written down all the things that are happening. And it took these are just various different initiatives and groups and things that are meeting. It took an entire side of A4. I think she was quite surprised to discover quite how much there was. But I want to say thank you to her for being involved with all of it and for leading it, given that she already has a very substantial workload in her own work and is a teacher, as we heard, of medical students as well as a GP, and does all of this on top, which is absolutely fantastic. I mean, I'm particularly interested in this because not only have I been involved in healing ministry for all my time ordained, but also, as you know, I'm the sort of lead bishop for health and social care, and by default that includes healing ministry. So the various things that go on I'm very involved with, and because there's so much going on, we have appointed a deputy to Alison to share some of the work, and that is Julia Pauli, who is familiar to many of you until very recently, Vicar of Harrington and Dissington over on the West Coast, has recently retired, but within the diocese, and she is also available, and she and Alison and others on their team are very, very happy to come and visit your church or your mission community or whatever, and talk about various aspects of healing ministry and to engage in training of groups and teams, and many people have already made use of them. As she mentioned, there are 3 Healthy Healing Hub openings. They're not totally cheap, these things, so the fact that we have funding for them and they would be free to you is something I would recommend very, very strongly indeed. Grab her before everybody else does, and she'll be able to fit you in within those 3 spaces. And all the other things that we've just heard about, Linking Lives not least, which I happen to be patron, and so very glad that's got a plug, and Anna Chaplaincy, and all these other groups, really important part of the ministry that's going on. And the more, as Alison was saying, we can work together on all these fronts, the better. But it is a vital aspect of what we do, of our mission here in the county. It was a very crucial part of Jesus' ministry. 1/3 of the Gospels is devoted to healing ministry, 1/3, which is absolutely remarkable. And it's all a part of our caring deeply strand of God for all. And healing ministry is not just for those who are already part of our congregations. It is for everybody, and part of our task to go out and help where there is a need. So thank you very much, Alison, and do get in touch with her or with Julia, and they'll be very pleased, I know, to respond.
We'll pray for you, for your healing.
Thank you, Bishop Jones. Thank you, Alison. I'm going to call Ali now to give us an update on wellbeing support.
Thank you. Now it's me doing it. Just wanted to give a brief update on where we've got to with clergy wellbeing support. Over the last year, the Clergy Wellbeing Group have sought to strengthen the resources available for clergy in support of clergy wellbeing. And over the summer, Nikki Smith, our Director of Ministry Development, and I took the opportunity to update the website with the options which are available to clergy in support of their wellbeing. The website URL is carlislediocese.org.uk, and then it's /clergy/wellbeing. If you just go on to the next slide, please. And on there, you will now find a plethora of resources available for you. So they include the Clergy Support Trust, Good Mental Health, the Interdiocesan Counselling Service, Listening Service, Listening Ministry, Thrive, St Luke's, Advice on Posture, Advice on Anxiety, Suicide Awareness, Resource, Health Assured, Sanctuary Days, Reflective Practice Group, Alison as Healing Advisor, and there's also now a list on there of retreats that you can avail yourself of. And I just wanted to draw your attention in particular to two. One is the Reflective Practice Groups. These are relatively new in the diocese. We've got one going at the moment. They are specifically for clergy, and they are run by an independent trained practitioner. And they're an opportunity for clergy to focus support and reflection on ministry and life. It forms part of your continuing ministerial development, and we've had excellent results in supporting clergy, and it can offer building blocks for mutual flourishing. If you're interested in doing that, please contact Steve or see myself at the end. And the other one I just wanted to draw your attention to, do go and have a look, because there's a massive range of stuff on there now, is Health Assured. And Health Assured is actually an employee assistance programme. And now don't balk at me because I've said the word employee, but it's designed to help people with personal and professional problems. And I know as clergy, you have access to a lot of resources, but your spouses and your children might not. And the advantage of Health Assured is that it's open to your spouses and children who are aged 16 to 24 in full-time education. And so it's an opening there that we haven't had before to support spouses and young adult children where perhaps they do need some support in terms of counselling. And then finally, do keep your eyes peeled for our Sanctuary Days, and the next of that will be in the spring. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ali. Cameron has a point.
This is just to add to what Ali said. Under the retreat lists, there's the link to the Association for Promoting Retreats. The number of bursaries and the number of grants for clergy has just increased. So if you're an ordinand, you can get a retreat paid for. If you're in a curacy, you can get a retreat paid for each year. And if you're a first appointment, you can get a retreat paid for. So this is a big increase in the support from the Association for Promoting Retreats. So please do encourage your clergy, especially those who are new to ministry, to take the opportunity for retreats, because to a large extent they're paid for.
They don't come out of your holidays either, do they? No. Holidays for clergy who don't know, that's a day when you're, or maybe a week when you're not at work. Look it up. It's quite useful. We have no Deanery Synod motions and no private members motions, but we do have a question from Simon Bickerstaff of Carlisle. You've got that in front of you, and I'm going to ask Eric Derrick to answer that.
Yeah, the question that Simon's asked is on the agenda paper. There are two parts to it. One is about churches and supporting the move to renewable energy sources, and the second is about energy efficiency measures for parsonages. So I've, with the help of colleagues, I've got a bit of information about this, quite a bit actually. If this sounds like I'm reading it out, it's because I'm reading it out. Okay. So the Diocese and the National Church of England Environment Team offer a range of advice and support to churches. The first step for a church, and this is around the whole carbon neutral thing, is to work through an online guidance note that the national team have provided, which is called the Church of England's Practical Path to Net Zero. And that's designed to help you work step by step through to identify what actions you can take. And included within that, it helps you make a judgment whether the installation of renewables might be justified or not, because it's definitely not the answer for all churches. In fact, in a Cumbrian context, probably not for many churches. For churches that do want to consider the installation of renewables, as a diocese, we're trying to develop some case studies that worked in our context, alongside some national ones. And the DAC, I know, is willing to provide preliminary advice on any such schemes, so please do get in touch about that. If you're in a smaller church where your usage doesn't justify the installation of renewables, the most practical thing to do when the market's stabilised is to switch to a 100% renewable electricity supplier, because that's something that can do relatively straightforwardly and does make a difference. In terms of energy efficiency, and for that matter switching to renewable, the diocese has available a fund called the Parish Property Fund, which pays small grants to churches for improvement work. And the fund has been in existence for a long time, and we've typically supported like installation of a kitchen or taking some pews out and creating more flexible space in churches, or putting a loo in a church or whatever. But that's been extended now to energy efficiency measures in churches. They're now regarded as improvements. So up to £3,000 grants available there. Appreciate if you want to do a major environmental piece of work in the church, it's going to cost substantially more than £3,000. But the £3,000 quite often can unlock the door for other funding sources. And if you want a project which is much bigger than that, the DBF can provide low-cost loans to parishes. And we typically, we expect strong cash flow or an asset that's sort of pledged as collateral against a loan. But with an energy efficiency project, you should be able to achieve savings on your running costs in future years. So arguably, there's a revenue stream there to pay back a loan if you take one out. So very flexible about that. Just get in touch with Rick Jakes, he can talk you through that. And then finally, on the church side of it, church commissioners, in their latest, this was in May, I think, when they announced the triennial funding settlement, they've allocated £190 million over 9 years for work across the Church of England towards net zero by 2030. I loved the fact that they'd done this across 9 years in 2022. So presumably they think we won't quite finished all the work by the end of the target date, but we'll see. They haven't announced how that's going to be allocated yet or what it's for, but obviously it's quite a sum of money. There was a conversation this week that I was part of in an interdiocesan forum where the head of the Archbishop's Council Finance Committee said at the moment that money's sort of backloaded towards the end of the period. If the consensus is that it could be spent usefully and effectively earlier on, then they'll bring the money forward. I think they've backloaded it because of the sense that technology should improve as time goes on. And you're sort of weighing then the urgency of it. So every pound of carbon you save now is a pound saved, isn't it? Versus saving it in a more efficient way in the future. But there'll be more detail on that subsequently. And on the church side, I'd also endorse what Val Hallard said in the General Synod item about signing up to become an eco-church, because eco-church, it addresses all aspects of environmental impact, but it includes the renewable energy side. And our Our approach on the carbon neutral for the local church is very largely try to get churches to look at Eco Church, Bronze, Silver and Gold awards. If you go through that process, you'll get a long way down the road, just as part of working through what you need to do and then doing it to get one of those awards. So that's the church side of it. On parsonages, in July at the General Synod, the Church of England's route map to net zero was endorsed, and that sets out for each area, including parsonages, what dioceses are expected to do in very broad terms and a timescale. In the diocese, we've now got small working groups on each area who are trying to turn that route map into what we're calling decarbonisation plans for each area. One of those is around parsonage houses. There's a group of people who understand what they're talking about around buildings, overseeing that. We're not rushing into it because, as I said, you've got to get the balance right between treating it as urgent and giving enough time for technologies to be tested and improved in the next few years before we implement them on a sort of scale across our housing stock. But what we've done to get ready for that is commission retrofitting reports, is what they're called, for a sample of properties. So like a typical Victorian vicarage, a typical Church Commissioner's 1980s replacement vicarage, a typical Georgian mansion or typical Bishop's Palace, whatever they are, so that we get a sense of, for each sort of category of our houses, what would be involved in retrofitting them to become carbon neutral, both in terms of what you can do and also the cost of it. And what we're planning to do is take one property that we're actually in the process of buying as a replacement parsonage at the moment and trying to do the full job on it as a test piece to see what do we learn from that. Interestingly, it's a house that we're buying which has got electric heating, and even just 2 or 3 years ago we would have said, rip it out, put oil in this case. Now we can actually use this as a real test case for maxing out on the insulation and maintaining an electric heating source and seeing whether we can do that in a really cost-effective way. So I'm quite excited about that. More broadly on clergy housing, the budget that we've approved today creates a specific fund for net zero work with parsonages, and it puts 250,000 quid a year into that from 2023. Julie Barrett from Penrith made the point about, is that enough? We don't know if that's going to be enough, but if more of the work is later on, it's much better to start creating a fund so that when we get to spend the money, we've got a 7-figure sum in the bank to spend, rather than waiting until we get later in the process and then trying to find even more money. And I think what we'll actually do, because we have a 5-year rolling programme of work on property, we'll do the quinquennial, we'll do the environmental improvements as part of the quinquennial programme over a 5-year period, and we probably won't start significantly on that straight away, because the bits that are potentially most difficult and around heating sources, we don't have the technology yet. The stuff we can do around insulation, etc., but some of that we'll do in the programme up to 2030. And then I just wanted to remind people of what Bishop Rob said about what we're calling for 2023 the LED challenge. And this is part of trying to think of some themes on the carbon neutral front, which cut across all different contexts, but help to raise awareness and get people to start thinking, I wonder what we could do, what's applicable for us. So as Bishop Rob said, the DBF, if there are any parsonages that don't have LED bulbs in their fittings and probably don't have fittings that could take LEDs, we'll fund the replacement of those in the course of 2023. It might sound trivial, but for those of you who haven't done the maths on LED lighting, which I hadn't until I was asking about this, a typical domestic LED fitting consumes 80% less power than a conventional equivalent and can last 15 to 20 times as long. So each bulb, this is unbelievable, a lot of you probably knew it, but it's news to me. Each bulb you fit that's LED that replaces a conventional filament or halogen bulb can save you 320 quid over the lifetime of that bulb. I was just blown away by that figure. I thought if you could do that for every bulb in every vicarage, in every church in the county, the amount of financial saving, never mind the energy efficiency side of it, the carbon side of it. And then we'd also recommend to our clergy that once energy markets are stabilised, clergy living in parsonages should move their energy supply to renewable tariffs. And then the other bit, which is from me rather than from colleagues who put this together, there's always a silver lining. So although energy costs have gone up a lot, the DBF has a £2 million investment in 2 hydroelectric schemes in the county. So I'm hoping that over the next few years, the dividends we get from that as part of our investment income will go up because the price has gone up as we get out of fixed contracts into new ones. So I'm quite positive about that, or at least I was, until I saw that the government has decided to have some sort of windfall tax on energy companies. So I'm just like praying that maybe we're below a de minimis level or something like that so we can get our dividends from that.
We have a point, yes. Carl, can we have the microphone to Carl, please?
As half-time stipendiary living in my own property, can I get some LEDs?
We'll have a conversation.
Thank you. Well, we are finishing way ahead of time. This is marvellous. Can I invite you to stand and we'll pray the grace for one another. May the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ and the love of God and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us all evermore. Amen. Thank you very much. Thank you.